I held a piece of paper worth $10 million, thinking my golden years were finally about to begin. But before I could even share the news, I discovered the people I loved most were already plotting to strip it all away. What they did not know was that 40 years of grease and grime had taught me exactly how to dismantle a broken machine. My name is Howard. I am 68 years old, a retired mechanic who spent his whole life building a foundation for a family that was rotten to the core. Before I tell you how I tore that foundation down, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that greed always reveals a person's true face. It was a regular Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in the cab of my beat-up 1998 Ford pickup, the smell of old motor oil and stale coffee filling the small space. The radio was playing softly in the background as I stared at the lottery ticket in my calloused hands. I looked at the winning numbers on my phone screen, then back at the ticket. 7, 14, 22, 38, 41, and the Powerball 12. My heart slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird. $10 million. I took off my faded baseball cap and wiped the sweat from my forehead. $10 million. After 40 years of turning wrenches, breathing in exhaust fumes, and breaking my back to keep a roof over my family, we were finally free. I laughed out loud, a deep rumbling sound that filled the truck. I could pay off the house. I could set up trust funds for my grandchildren. I could finally take Diane on that Alaskan cruise she had been talking about for 10 years. I folded the ticket carefully, tucked it into my front shirt pocket, and patted it to make sure it was absolutely secure. I put the truck in gear and headed home, my mind racing with 1,000 beautiful plans. I could not wait to see the look on my wife's face. I parked halfway down the driveway, my hands trembling with excitement. I practically jogged up the front steps, ready to burst through the door and shout the incredible news. But as I reached for the front doorknob, I heard intense voices coming from the open kitchen window to my left. It was my wife Diane, my son Aaron, and my son-in-law Logan. I paused, smiling to myself, thinking about how I was about to change all their lives forever. But then I heard my name, and the tone of their voices froze the blood in my veins. I stepped off the porch and leaned closer to the window, keeping myself completely hidden behind the large oak bushes. "I am telling you the old man won," Logan was saying. His voice carried that familiar, arrogant drawl, the one that always made me feel like a second-class citizen in my own home. I checked the browsing history on his laptop this morning. He was on the state lottery site, checking the winning numbers for over an hour. I cross-referenced the transaction receipt he left on the kitchen counter. It is a perfect match. He hit the jackpot. $10 million. There was a sharp intake of breath. It was Diane. 10 million. My God, are you absolutely certain, Logan? This is not a joke. Positive. Diane, Logan replied, his tone dripping with condescension. But listen to me carefully. We cannot just let him walk in here and announce it like he is the king of the castle. You know exactly how Howard is. He is soft. He will want to donate half of it to his church. He will want to start some ridiculous mechanic scholarship program for neighborhood kids. That old man simply does not have the intellect or the financial literacy to manage $10 million. If we let him control this money, he is going to blow our inheritance on charity and bad investments before we see a single dime. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I waited for my son to speak up. I waited for Aaron to defend me, to tell his arrogant white brother-in-law to show some respect to his father. Instead, Aaron's voice sliced through the crisp afternoon air, cold and painfully calculated. "Logan is right, Mom. Dad is too old-fashioned. He does not understand generational wealth. If we let him hold the reins, he will ruin this massive opportunity for all of us. We need to secure the money before he makes any stupid emotional decisions. Secure it how Diane asked." Her voice was not trembling with shock anymore. It was vibrating with a sudden naked greed. "We need to get him to sign over power of attorney," Logan said smoothly, like he was pitching a corporate merger. "Or better yet, we convince him he is losing his memory. We get a doctor to sign off on his cognitive decline. We step in as his legal guardians, put the money into a trust that we control, and give him a strict allowance. It is for his own good." "What if he resists?" Aaron asked. "You know how stubborn he can be when he thinks he is right." "Then we force his hand," Diane said. Her voice was utterly unrecognizable to me. It was hard metallic, completely devoid of the warmth I had known for 4 decades. "We start today. We make him question his own mind. We cannot let him waste our future." The words hit me harder than any physical blow I had ever taken in my life. My legs felt incredibly weak, and I had to grip the rough brick windowsill to keep from collapsing onto the dirt. Our future. That was what Diane called it. Not my money. Their future. I thought back to the year Aaron got accepted into that expensive private university. We did not have the money. I took a second mortgage on this very house. I cashed out half of my hard-earned retirement fund. I worked double shifts at the garage, coming home at 2 a.m. with my hands blistered, greased, and bleeding just so my son could sit in air-conditioned classrooms and wear nice suits. I sacrificed my own body so he would not have to struggle. And Diane? I had given that woman everything I had to give. I worked myself to the bone so she could stay home and live comfortably. And now they were standing in the kitchen I paid for, agreeing with a man who looked down on my skin and my profession, plotting to steal my money and strip away my dignity. I reached into my plaid shirt pocket and my fingers brushed against the folded lottery ticket. Just moments ago, it felt like a blessing, a miracle sent from above to reward a lifetime of honest, grueling work. Now it felt like a cursed object, a magnifying glass that had stripped away the polite smiles and exposed the ugly, rotting truth of my family. I stood there in the fading afternoon light, the cool autumn breeze rustling the dead leaves around me. The crushing sorrow in my chest slowly hardened, crystallizing into something else entirely. The grief vanished completely, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp clarity. They thought I was just an old, uneducated mechanic. They thought I was soft. They thought I would simply roll over and let them dictate the rest of my life while they spent my millions. Logan thought he was the smartest man in the room. Diane thought she could play the loving, concerned wife. Aaron thought he could sell out his own father for a massive payout. I pulled my hand out of my pocket, leaving the ticket safely tucked away against my chest. I took a deep breath, letting the icy air fill my lungs and clear my mind. If they wanted to play a game of manipulation, I would give them a game. I would give them the performance of a lifetime. They wanted to treat me like a senile old fool who was losing his grip on reality. Fine. I would let them dig their own graves deep and wide. I backed away from the window, my footsteps silent on the grass. I walked back to my truck, sat in the driver's seat for 5 minutes, and let my face relax into an expression of utter confusion and panic. It was time to act. I pushed the front door open, letting it slam against the wall to announce my arrival. I stumbled into the kitchen, my chest heaving as if I had just run a marathon. Diane, Aaron, and Logan were sitting at the table, their faces instantly snapping toward me, hiding their previous treacherous conversation behind masks of mild surprise. I did not give them a chance to speak. I began frantically patting down my jeans, digging my hands into my jacket pockets, turning them inside out. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I widened my eyes, staring blankly at the kitchen counter, then back at my empty hands. I muttered, my voice shaking with perfectly calculated panic. My wallet. I cannot find my wallet. Diane stood up, her brow furrowing in fake concern. Howard, honey, what is wrong? You are pale. I ignored her, pacing the kitchen floor, pulling out my empty pants pockets to show them. It is gone. My wallet is gone. And the ticket. The lottery ticket I bought yesterday was inside it. I checked the numbers at the gas station. I won. I actually won, but now everything is gone. I must have dropped it in the parking lot. The temperature in the room plummeted. For a split second, absolute silence hung over the kitchen as the reality of my words hit them. $10 million gone. The polite masks they wore instantly shattered, replaced by raw, unfiltered panic. Logan was the first to react. His face turned a splotchy crimson, the arrogant smirk completely wiped away. "Are you kidding me?" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "You lost a winning lottery ticket. How do you just lose something like that?" He did not wait for an answer. He shoved past Aaron and dropped to his knees, frantically clawing at the gap beneath the refrigerator, pulling out dust bunnies and stray dog kibble. Aaron was right behind him, his eyes wild and dilated. "Dad, think. Where exactly did you go? Did you leave it in the truck? Did you drop it in the driveway?" Aaron did not wait for my response either. He sprinted toward the front door, leaving it wide open as he began tearing through the front yard, kicking aside the dead leaves, practically crawling on the grass in search of a tiny piece of paper. I watched Logan aggressively flip the heavy sofa cushions in the living room, tossing them onto the floor, running his hands deep into the crevices of the upholstery. The sophisticated, educated man who thought I was an ignorant mechanic was now crawling on his hands and knees, grunting and sweating like a desperate animal. Then came Diane. She approached me with her arms outstretched, her face twisted into a mask of deep sympathy. "Oh, Howard, sweetheart," she cooed, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. "It is okay. Breathe. We will find it. You are just confused. Your memory has not been the best lately." But while her words were soft and comforting, her hands were entirely different. As she hugged me, her fingers aggressively dug into my chest pockets. She roughly patted down my sides, her nails pressing hard against my thighs as she searched for any hidden bulge. It was an invasive, frantic frisking disguised as an embrace. She was not trying to comfort her husband. She was frisking a suspect. I let my arms hang limply at my sides, playing the part of a defeated, confused old man, while inside my stomach churned at her physical betrayal. "I do not understand," I whispered, keeping my voice shaky. "I swear I put it in my pocket. My mind is just so foggy today." Diane pulled back her eyes, scanning my face with a cold, calculating intensity that made my skin crawl. She squeezed my arms tight enough to bruise. "Why do you not go lie down, Howard? You are clearly having one of your episodes. Let us handle this." I nodded slowly, maintaining my bewildered expression, and shuffled heavily toward the hallway. I paused at the threshold, watching the absolute destruction of my living room. Logan had moved from the sofa to the trash can in the kitchen. He violently overturned the bin, spilling coffee grounds, eggshells, and wet paper towels onto the pristine tile floor. He dropped to his knees, using his bare hands to sift through the garbage, completely disregarding his expensive designer suit. Aaron stormed back into the house, his shoes tracking mud everywhere. He shoved Logan aside. "It is not in the yard. You check the truck. I will check his work boots," he barked at his brother-in-law. They collided in the narrow hallway, shoving each other out of the way with vicious, greedy shoves. Neither of them even looked at me. I was a ghost in my own house, completely invisible to them now that the money was supposedly lost. I leaned against the hallway wall, watching the three of them descend into absolute madness. The speed at which they turned on each other was terrifying. Logan snapped at Aaron to move faster, calling him useless. Aaron fired back, cursing Logan for sitting around doing nothing while I was at the store. Diane was frantically opening and slamming kitchen drawers, her face flushed with silent fury. They were like a pack of starving wolves fighting over a scrap of meat completely devoid of dignity or family loyalty. The $10 million had not even materialized yet, and it had already destroyed whatever thin illusion of a family we had left. I realized then that my money was not going to change them. It was merely accelerating who they already were. I stood there, an old man in a faded plaid shirt, watching my educated son, my sophisticated son-in-law, and my loving wife rip our house apart. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt an absolute freezing calm. The trap was set and they were sprinting right into it. I turned away from the chaos and walked slowly into my bedroom, closing the heavy oak door behind me. The silence of the room was a stark contrast to the shouting and crashing echoing from the kitchen. I walked over to my nightstand, feeling a genuine physical exhaustion settle into my bones from the adrenaline. Sitting right next to my alarm clock was a tall glass of ice water. Diane always left one for me in the afternoon, a habit I had always viewed as a quiet act of love. I reached for the glass, my throat dry from the performance I had just given. I took a large gulp, expecting the crisp, refreshing chill of filtered water. Instead, a sharp chemical bitterness coated my tongue. I froze the glass, hovering near my lips. I brought the rim back to my nose and sniffed carefully. Beneath the faint smell of the ice, there was a distinctly chalky medicinal odor. The conversation I had overheard earlier rang in my ears. "We convince him he is losing his memory. We get a doctor to sign off on his cognitive decline. We make him question his own mind." A cold realization washed over me. Diane was not wasting any time. She had already crushed something into my water, a mild sedative or a tranquilizer, to make me sluggish, forgetful, and pliant. She wanted to physically manufacture the dementia they needed to steal my fortune. My own wife of 40 years was poisoning me in my own bedroom. I stared at the bitter liquid, my jaw clenching so hard my teeth ached. I walked quietly to the large potted fern sitting by the bedroom window and slowly poured the entire glass into the dark soil. I set the empty glass back on the nightstand, perfectly positioned. Let them think their poison was working. Let them think I was fading away. They had no idea the mine they were trying to break was currently 10 steps ahead of them. I woke up at 4 in the morning. The house was dead silent, save for the rhythmic breathing of the woman lying next to me, the woman who had tried to drug me just hours before. I did not close my eyes once during the night. I moved with the practiced stealth of a man used to waking up for early shifts at the garage. I dressed in my dark gray suit, the one I usually saved for weddings and funerals. Today it was for a rebirth. I grabbed my old leather briefcase from the top shelf of the closet, tucked the winning lottery ticket safely inside an interior zipper pocket, and crept down the hallway. I bypassed the squeaky floorboard near the stairs, relying on a mental map I knew by heart. In the kitchen, the remnants of yesterday's frantic search were still scattered across the tiles. They had stayed up late, tearing the house apart, desperate for the paper I held against my chest. I slipped out the back door, the crisp morning air hitting my face like a splash of cold water. I got into my truck, kept the headlights off until I hit the main road, and drove toward the city, leaving my treacherous family behind in their blissful, greedy ignorance. By 6 a.m, I was sitting in the polished mahogany waiting room of Hayes & Associates. Mr. Hayes was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney, known for handling high-net-worth estates with absolute discretion. I had called his emergency line during the night, explaining the dire urgency of my situation. When he stepped into the lobby, adjusting his tie, he looked at my worn face and nodded. We went straight into his private office. I laid the ticket on his massive desk and told him everything. I told him about the $10 million, the terrifying conversation I overheard between my wife's son and son-in-law, and the drugged water sitting on my nightstand. Mr. Hayes listened without interrupting his pen, scratching rapidly against a legal pad. His expression shifted from professional curiosity to cold, calculated anger. He had seen families tear each other apart over a few $1,000s, but the betrayal I described was on another level entirely. "Mr. Howard," he said, leaning forward, "we need to move immediately. If they file for legal guardianship before you claim this, they can drag you into a drawn-out court battle and freeze your assets. We are going to build a fortress they cannot breach." He began drafting the paperwork for an irrevocable trust right then and there. We named it the Iron Shield Trust. By legally transferring the winning ticket into the trust before claiming the prize, I was surrendering my direct personal ownership of the money. I was placing it under the total protection of a legal entity, with Mr. Hayes acting as the independent fiduciary. We spent 2 hours reviewing clauses, signing documents, notarizing pages, and legally separating my identity from the upcoming windfall. As soon as the ink was dry, we drove together in his sleek black sedan to the state lottery headquarters. We bypassed the public lines and were escorted into a private back office reserved for major winners. The state lottery officials took the ticket, verified the security codes, ran the serial numbers, and confirmed the massive win. Mr. Hayes handled all the legal maneuvering, presenting the Iron Shield Trust documentation as the sole beneficiary. I requested absolute anonymity, a right protected under our state laws when claiming through a specific trust structure. There would be no giant novelty check, no press conference, no smiling photos in the local newspaper. The $10 million was processed, the heavy taxes were deducted, and the remaining millions were wired directly into the highly secure trust accounts we had just established. In the eyes of the law, the state, and the global banking system, Howard the retired mechanic was still just a retired mechanic living on a modest pension. The fortune completely evaporated from my personal name shielded behind a wall of impenetrable legal armor. I walked out of that building a profoundly wealthy man, but on paper I was exactly as I had been yesterday. The transition was seamless, a phantom transaction that left no trace for my greedy family to follow. I felt a tremendous weight lift off my shoulders as the lottery director handed Mr. Hayes the final confirmation receipts. They shook hands, finalizing the transfer. My son and my son-in-law thought they were financial geniuses, but they were amateurs playing a dangerous game against a man who now had top-tier legal backing. The trap they had planned for me was now entirely obsolete. Before we parted ways, Mr. Hayes stood by my truck and handed me a thick folder containing the copies of our arrangement. Howard listened to me closely. He said, his voice firm and reassuring. "The Iron Shield Trust is irrevocable. That means it cannot be altered, amended, or terminated by you, and more importantly, it cannot be touched by your wife, your son, or your son-in-law under any circumstances. Even if they somehow manage to declare you completely legally incompetent tomorrow, this money is strictly out of their reach. It does not belong to you as an individual anymore. It belongs exclusively to the trust. They cannot sue you for it. Diane cannot claim it in a divorce settlement. Logan cannot manipulate it into his sketchy investments. They can dig, they can scheme, and they can drag you to court, but they will hit a solid brick wall every single time. You hold all the cards now. You are entirely protected." I shook his hand tightly, feeling a profound sense of gratitude and power. For the first time since yesterday afternoon, I felt completely safe and ready for the war ahead. I drove back to my house just as the late morning sun was burning off the remaining dew. I pulled into the driveway, took a deep breath to reset my features into the bewildered, vulnerable old man they expected to see, and unlocked the front door. The house was unnervingly quiet, a stark contrast to the frantic energy of the previous day. I walked into the living room and stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting on my favorite armchair, holding a clipboard and a silver pen, was a strange man I had never seen before. He was wearing a crisp white dress shirt, a conservative tie, and a pristine white medical coat. His face was entirely unreadable, professional, and incredibly cold. Diane was sitting on the sofa across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Aaron and Logan were standing by the fireplace like silent guards waiting to execute an order. When I walked in, Diane immediately stood up, her face twisting into that same sickeningly fake expression of deep concern she had worn the day before. "Howard, sweetheart, you are finally home," she said softly, approaching me with slow, deliberate steps as if approaching a frightened animal. "We were getting so worried about you wandering off like that early in the morning." I looked at the stranger sitting in my chair. "Who is this?" I asked, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. Diane reached out and gently took my arm, guiding me further into the room. "This is Dr. Evans Howard. He is a highly respected psychiatrist. Aaron and Logan helped me arrange a home visit. We just want to make sure your memory and your mind are completely okay after your little episode yesterday. It is just a routine cognitive evaluation for your own good." I allowed Diane to guide me to the sofa, playing the part of the compliant, confused elder. Dr. Evans clicked his silver pen, leaning forward with a patronizing, sympathetic smile that immediately made my blood boil. "Howard." He began, his tone slow and deliberate, like he was speaking to a frightened toddler. "Your family tells me you had a bit of a scare yesterday. You lost something very important, did you not? They are very worried about your state of mind." I stared at him, letting a heavy, uncomfortable silence stretch across the room. He cleared his throat and tried again, pulling a notepad from his lap. "Can you tell me what year it is? Howard, do you know who the current president is? Can you count backward from 100 by sevens?" These were standard basic cognitive test questions. They were actively trying to establish a baseline of disorientation on the record. Diane sat right next to me, gently patting my knee, performing her role perfectly. "Go ahead and answer the doctor, sweetheart," she urged softly. "We just want to help you." Logan crossed his arms, leaning against the fireplace mantel, an arrogant smirk plastered on his face. They all waited for me to stumble to act, bewildered, to hand them the exact medical ammunition they needed to lock me away and steal my life. I looked down at my hands, rough and scarred from decades of hard labor, and then slowly raised my head. The act was over. I locked eyes with Dr. Evans, my gaze as cold and unyielding as steel. "It is Tuesday," I said, my voice steady, deep, and completely devoid of the tremor I had faked earlier. "The year is 2024. The president is currently sitting in the Oval Office, and counting backward by sevens is a parlor trick for medical students. Now let me ask you a question, Dr. Evans. Are you aware of the legal and ethical ramifications of conducting an unsolicited psychiatric evaluation in a private residence without the informed written consent of the patient?" Dr. Evans blinked rapidly, his professional smile faltering instantly. The pen in his hand went still. "Excuse me?" he stammered clearly, taken aback by the sudden shift in my demeanor. I leaned forward, dropping the confused old man routine entirely. "I asked if you are aware that stepping into my home at the behest of a third party to medically evaluate me without my prior consent is a direct violation of medical ethics and potentially grounds for a severe malpractice suit. I am of sound mind. I have not been deemed a danger to myself or others, and I have absolutely not authorized this consultation. So I highly suggest you pack up your little clipboard and leave my house before I call my lawyer and the state medical board to report you for ethical violations." The room went deathly quiet. Diane pulled her hand away from my knee as if she had been physically burned by my words. Aaron shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting nervously between me and the doctor. But Logan, ever the arrogant fool who believed he was untouchable, stepped forward. "Now listen here," Howard Logan sneered, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. "You are acting erratic. You are having delusions about a lottery ticket, and you are clearly becoming hostile and aggressive. Dr. Evans is a highly respected professional doing us a massive favor by coming here. You need to sit down, shut your mouth, and cooperate before we have to take legal action to protect you from yourself." I stood up slowly, drawing myself up to my full height. I was an old man, but 40 years of hauling heavy engine blocks had left me broad, solid, and physically imposing. I walked right up to Logan, stopping mere inches from his face, forcing him to look me in the eye. "You listen to me, you entitled little punk," I growled, my voice vibrating with decades of suppressed anger. "You are standing in a house that my sweat paid for. You are wearing a suit bought with money from a job you only got because I co-signed your first business loan when no bank would look at you. Do not ever speak to me like I am a child. Do not come into my home and threaten me with legal action. And do not ever presume that your college degree makes you smarter than the man who built the very floor you are standing on." Logan swallowed hard, taking a slight step back. I turned my attention back to the doctor, who was already sliding his pen into his pocket and standing up, his face pale and completely unnerved. "The front door is right behind you, Dr. Evans," I said sharply. "Use it. Do not ever come back here." The doctor gave a hasty, awkward nod to Diane, muttered a quick apology, and practically scrambled out the front door. The heavy thud of the door closing echoed through the silent living room like a gunshot. Logan was fuming, his face flushed with a mixture of intense embarrassment and rage. Aaron looked absolutely terrified, staring a hole into the floorboards. Diane was completely frozen, her eyes wide with shock. They had expected an easy, quiet victory. They had expected me to crumble under the authoritative pressure of a white coat and a clipboard. Instead, I had systematically dismantled their ambush with cold, hard logic. I walked past them without saying another word and headed straight for my study. As I closed the heavy door behind me, the terrifying reality of the situation fully settled into my bones. They were moving much faster and much more aggressively than I had initially anticipated. The drugged water yesterday, the surprise doctor today. They were genuinely desperate. They knew they needed to establish my mental incompetence immediately to seize control of the $10 million they still believed was floating around in my personal name. The legal shield I had built with Mr. Hayes earlier that morning was impenetrable, but my physical safety in this house was deteriorating by the hour. I needed to know exactly how far my own blood was willing to go to rob me blind. That afternoon, while Diane was out running errands and Aaron and Logan were supposedly at their corporate jobs, I drove to a local electronics store on the other side of town. I purchased a state-of-the-art set of high-definition motion-activated hidden cameras. I returned home and spent a meticulous hour carefully installing a tiny, virtually invisible camera inside the vent of the smoke detector in my study. I angled the lens perfectly downward, aiming it directly at my heavy steel safe tucked in the corner. It was an old mechanical safe where I kept my life insurance documents, the original deed to the house, and a vintage savings passbook that held a rainy day fund of exactly $22,000. That night, the atmosphere in the house was suffocatingly tense. No one spoke a single word during dinner. We ate in a heavy silence, the air thick with unspoken hostility and brewing schemes. I retired to my bedroom early, locking the door firmly behind me. I lay in the dark, the bright glow of my smartphone illuminating my face. I had the security application open, watching the live feed of my study in stark black and white night vision. At exactly 2 a.m, the motion alert silently vibrated in the palm of my hand. I watched the screen intently, barely breathing. The study door slowly pushed open. A figure slipped into the room holding a small flashlight muffled by their hand. It was Aaron, my own son. He crept over to my desk, bypassing the drawers entirely, and went straight for the safe. He pulled a small piece of paper from his pocket, clearly a note with the combination he must have stolen or memorized years ago. He spun the dial expertly. The heavy door swung open. Aaron reached inside frantically, bypassing the thick folders of insurance documents, and pulled out my old savings passbook. He shoved it deep into his jacket pocket, closed the safe, spun the dial to lock it, and vanished back into the dark hallway. The betrayal was absolute and undeniable. He was not just plotting to steal my future wealth. He was actively stealing my past hard work. The next morning, I parked my truck outside a run-down diner on the edge of town. The neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a harsh red light against the gray sky. Sitting in the back booth was a man in a faded brown trench coat. This was Detective Cole. Mr. Hayes had recommended him, highly describing him as a man who specialized in digging up the ugliest truths people tried to bury. I slid into the booth across from him. Cole did not offer a polite greeting or a handshake. He simply slid a thick manila folder across the sticky table, followed by a digital tablet. I asked him to look into Aaron first, to find out exactly why a supposedly successful investment banker was desperate enough to steal $22,000 from his father's safe in the dead of night. I knew Aaron was greedy, but sneaking around like a petty thief meant he was desperate. Cole tapped the screen of the tablet. "You have a serious problem, Howard," he said, his voice gravelly from years of cheap cigarettes. "Your son is not an investment banker anymore. He was fired 6 months ago for embezzling client funds. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. Press play." I tapped the play button on the screen. The footage was grainy shot from a hidden surveillance camera in a dimly lit alleyway behind a dive bar downtown. 2 massive men in dark leather jackets had Aaron pinned against a brick wall. My son, dressed in his expensive tailored suit, looked completely disheveled. His tie was ripped, his shirt was stained with dirt, and blood was dripping from his split lip. One of the men grabbed Aaron by the collar, slamming him hard against the brick. The heavy thud echoed through the tablet speaker, making me wince instinctively. "Where is the money, Aaron?" the man growled, pulling a heavy brass knuckle from his pocket. "You owe us $200,000. The boss is out of patience. You said you had a massive real estate deal closing last week. That was a lie. You have 48 hours before we stop taking your blood and start taking your limbs." Aaron dropped to his knees, sinking into the filthy puddles of the alleyway. The polished, arrogant son who had stood in my kitchen plotting to declare me legally incompetent was now whimpering and sobbing like a terrified child. He pressed his hands together, begging the men who hovered over him. "Please listen to me," Aaron cried out, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "I have the money. I swear to God I have it. My dad just won the state lottery. He hit the jackpot. $10 million. The men stopped, exchanging a skeptical look. The one with the brass knuckles scoffed, kicking Aaron squarely in the ribs. "Do not lie to me, you pathetic piece of trash. If your dad is a millionaire, why are you begging in an alley?" Aaron gasped for air, clutching his side. "I am not lying. I saw the ticket with my own eyes. He just won it 2 days ago. But he is an old fool. He is losing his mind. He cannot manage that kind of cash. Please just give me 1 week. I am getting him to sign over a full power of attorney. Once I have the legal authority, I control the entire $10 million. I will pay you back double. Just give me 7 days to get his signature." The thugs stared down at him. The larger one grabbed Aaron by the hair, yanking his head back. 7 days, he spat. "If you do not have the cash by next Tuesday, we will not just come for you. We will pay a visit to your rich old dad and collect it ourselves." They threw him to the wet asphalt and walked away, leaving my son curled up in a pathetic crying heap. The video ended, fading to a black screen. I sat in the diner booth, staring at my own reflection in the dark glass of the tablet. My hands were gripping the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles had turned completely white. Cole took a sip of his black coffee, watching my reaction. "He owes money to the Petrov Syndicate, Howard. These guys do not play around. They run illegal gambling rings and predatory loan operations. Your son has been borrowing heavily to fund a lifestyle he could not afford since he lost his job. The $22,000 he stole from your safe last night was probably just a minor appeasement payment to keep his kneecaps intact for another 24 hours. But it will not save him." For a fleeting, agonizing second, the instinct of a father flared up inside my chest. Watching my boy bleed in an alley, begging for his life, tore at my heart. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bike, bandaging his scraped knees, and working double shifts to buy him his first car. I wanted to help him. I wanted to pay off the debt and save him from those monsters. But then the harsh, freezing reality washed over me, extinguishing that paternal warmth completely. Aaron had not come to me for help. He had not confessed his mistakes and asked for forgiveness. Instead, he had decided to steal my life-savings drug, my water, and conspire to lock me in a psychiatric ward so he could hijack my massive fortune to save his own skin. He had literally offered me up as collateral to a violent crime syndicate. He was perfectly willing to destroy my life to preserve his lies. I looked up at Detective Cole, my face turning to stone. "Keep monitoring him," I said, my voice eerily calm. "But do not intervene. Let him dig." The next morning the house was quiet as I sat in my favorite armchair sipping a cup of coffee I had made myself. I heard hurried footsteps coming down the hallway. Aaron rushed into the living room, his appearance completely shattered. He had tried to cover the bruise on his lip with makeup, but the swelling was obvious. His eyes were bloodshot and he was trembling. He did not say good morning. He simply collapsed to his knees right in front of my chair. Tears began streaming down his face, a magnificent, desperate performance. "Dad, please, you have to help me," he sobbed, grabbing my hand. "I am so worried about you. Your memory has been slipping. You are acting erratically, and I cannot bear the thought of you struggling to manage your affairs. You worked too hard your whole life to be stressed now. I want to take the burden off your shoulders." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket with shaking hands and pulled out a thick, stapled document. He laid it gently on my lap. "It is a full power of attorney." Aaron pleaded, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "It just gives me the legal right to handle the bills, the property, and the finances so you can just relax and enjoy your retirement. Just sign it, Dad. Let me take care of you like you took care of me." I looked down at the legal document, resting on my knees, then stared into the swollen, desperate eyes of my betrayer. The trap was laid right at my feet, and he was begging me to step into it. Aaron gripped my hand tighter, his tears soaking into my calloused skin. "Dad, please," he whispered, his voice trembling with a sickeningly perfect imitation of a devoted son. "You have broken your back for this family for 40 years. You missed my baseball games because you were pulling double shifts at the garage. You gave up your own dreams so I could go to that fancy private college. It is my turn to carry the weight. You are getting older and your mind is just not as sharp as it used to be. I cannot sleep at night knowing you might make a mistake and lose everything you worked so hard to build. I just want to protect you. I want to handle the heavy bills, the taxes, all the stressful paperwork. You just need to sign right here on the dotted line and I will take care of the rest. I will take care of you, Dad. I promise." It was a masterclass in manipulation, weaponizing my own love and lifelong sacrifice against me in a desperate bid to save his own skin. I let a long, heavy sigh escape my lips, playing the part of the weary, vulnerable father perfectly. I reached up and rubbed my temples. "I appreciate that, Aaron. I really do. But my eyes are giving me a lot of trouble today. I think I left my reading glasses out in the truck. Why do you not read it to me? Just so I know exactly what I am signing over to you." Aaron hesitated, a flash of pure annoyance briefly breaking through his sorrowful mask. "Oh, Dad, it is just standard legal boilerplate. It says I can pay the electric bill and manage the bank accounts. You do not need to hear all that boring jargon." I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. If it is just standard boilerplate, then it should not take long to read. "Read it to me, son. Every single word." Aaron gritted his teeth, the desperation in his eyes warring with his rising impatience. He cleared his throat and began reading the dense legal text. He sped through the first 3 clauses, which detailed basic banking and postal authorizations. His voice a frantic, mumbled blur. He tried to skip past the next thick paragraph, moving straight to the signature line at the bottom of the page. "Hold on," I interrupted, holding up a firm hand. "You skipped clause number 4. Read clause number 4. Aaron swallowed hard, sweat beaded on his forehead, catching the morning light. "Dad, it is just about property maintenance." "Read it, Aaron." His hand shook as he looked down at the paper. "Clause 4, he mumbled, his voice dropping. "The agent shall have full and unmitigated authority to manage, encumber, lease, or sell any and all real estate properties owned by the principal, including the primary residence." I let the words hang in the heavy air of the living room. Sell the primary residence. My house. The house I paid off with my own blood and sweat. So I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing all trace of the confused old man. "You want the legal right to sell my house out from under me?" Aaron panicked. "No, Dad, it is just a standard inclusion. I would never sell the house. I just need the power in case of a medical emergency." I stared at him, my gaze boring holes into his deceitful soul. "You mean a medical emergency like the one you and your mother are trying to invent? Or maybe a financial emergency like owing $200,000 to a violent crime syndicate?" Aaron froze. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickly ashen gray. He stumbled backward, falling onto his rear, his eyes wide with absolute horror. "What? How do you know about that?" "Because I am not the senile old fool you think I am," I growled. The fear in Aaron vanished instantly, replaced by the vicious, entitled monster he truly was. He scrambled to his feet, his face contorted in raw, ugly rage. "You crazy old man," he screamed, all pretense of love completely gone. "You do not know what you are doing. You are going to get me killed. You have $10 million sitting around and you are too stupid to know how to use it. Just sign the paper." He lunged forward, shoving a pen at my face. I stood up, snatching the legal document from his trembling hands. I looked him dead in the eye, gripped the thick stack of papers, and ripped them straight down the middle. I tore them again and threw the shredded pieces violently onto the floor. "Get out of my sight," I said. Aaron backed away, his chest heaving, his eyes darting to the shredded paper on the rug. He turned and bolted toward the kitchen, completely panicked. But he was not the only one in the house. As I stood in the living room, I caught a glimpse of movement in the shadowy hallway. It was my daughter Jasmine. She was standing perfectly still, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She had witnessed the entire confrontation. I waited for her to run to me to ask if I was okay to express shock at her brother's violent outburst. Instead, she backed away silently into the guest bathroom. I walked quietly to the hallway and listened through the thin wooden door. She was on the phone. "Logan, you need to get over here now," she hissed into the receiver, her voice dripping with urgency. "Aaron just tried to force Dad to sign a full power of attorney. That greedy bastard is trying to cut us out and take the entire $10 million for himself. We have to move our timeline up. If we do not lock Dad away right now, Aaron is going to steal our money." I walked back to my bedroom, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm of absolute resolve. My entire family was a den of vipers, each one racing to strike me first. But I still needed to know exactly what Diane was using to drug my water. I waited until I heard the front door open and close as Diane left for her weekly grocery run. I went straight to her closet and pulled down her favorite designer handbag, the one I had bought for her anniversary. I dug through the side compartments until my fingers brushed against a small, unmarked plastic vial filled with white powder. I slipped a pinch of the powder into a small plastic baggie and immediately called Detective Cole. I met him an hour later behind the local pharmacy, handing him the sample. He had a contact at a private toxicology lab who owed him a favor and could run it immediately. By the time the sun began to set, my phone buzzed with a message from Cole. It was a picture of the lab results. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. The powder was not a mild sedative or a sleeping pill. It was a highly potent synthetic hallucinogen. In regular doses, it caused severe paranoia, auditory hallucinations, and a complete detachment from reality. They were not just trying to make me look a little forgetful. Diane was deliberately dosing me with a chemical designed to cause a violent psychotic break. They wanted to drive me clinically, genuinely insane, so that no judge or doctor would ever believe a single word I said. The depth of their evil was staggering. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning, a thick manila envelope was wedged tightly into the crack of my front porch screen door. There was no return address, just a single black initial scrawled in the top corner. A simple C for Cole. I grabbed the package, checked the street to make sure no one was watching, and took it straight to my study, locking the heavy oak door behind me. I sat at my desk, turned on the small reading lamp, and broke the seal. Inside was a comprehensive dossier on Logan, the man who married my daughter, and strutted around my house, acting like he owned the very air we breathed. Logan always projected the image of a wealthy, successful tech entrepreneur. He drove a European sports car, wore watches that cost more than my entire first mortgage, and constantly belittled my life as a mechanic. He called my profession menial and outdated. But the papers spilling out across my desk painted a completely different picture. The illusion of his generational wealth and Silicon Valley success was nothing but a fragile house of cards. And right now, that house was actively collapsing. Cole had dug deep past the shiny social media profiles and the fake corporate websites straight down into the rotting foundation of Logan's actual life. Logan was the primary target of an active, highly classified federal investigation. The FBI was building a massive RICO case against him for orchestrating a multi-million-dollar cryptocurrency fraud ring. According to the documents, he had set up a series of sophisticated shell companies, lured in hundreds of hardworking middle-class investors with promises of guaranteed returns, and then completely drained the accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle. The files Cole provided included leaked internal memos from federal prosecutors. They were weeks, maybe even days away from securing a grand jury indictment. Logan was not just broke, he was facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary. But the most disturbing part of the dossier was the financial tracing Cole had managed to uncover. Logan was frantically trying to secure $3 million in untraceable offshore accounts so he could flee the country to a non-extradition territory before the feds kicked his door down. He needed that cash urgently, and my $10 million lottery win was the perfect miraculous lifeboat he needed to fund his escape. Then, I found the audio transcripts. Cole had managed to pull logs of recorded phone calls between Logan and Jasmine from the past 48 hours. As I read the exact words my son-in-law had spoken to my daughter, an icy, paralyzing fury gripped my chest. Logan was not just using Jasmine to get to my money. He was ruthlessly blackmailing her. The transcripts revealed that Logan had secretly listed Jasmine as a primary shareholder and chief financial officer in several of his fraudulent shell companies. She had signed stacks of legal documents without reading them, trusting her husband blindly. Now Logan was weaponizing her trust against her. "Jasmine, you listen to me very carefully," Logan had hissed on one of the calls. "The feds are sniffing around the main accounts. If I go down for this wire fraud, your name is on every single piece of paper. You are the registered financial director of the holding company. You will be sitting in a federal cell right next to me for conspiracy to commit fraud. They will seize everything you own. You will be a convicted felon." Jasmine had been crying, her voice small and terrified. "Logan, please, I did not know what you were doing. I thought it was a legitimate tech startup. I just signed where you told me to sign. Ignorance is not a legal defense in federal court." Logan snapped back, his voice dripping with absolute venom. "The only way we get out of this alive is if we get the cash to vanish. Your father has $10 million sitting around waiting to be claimed. I need $3 million of it by the end of the month to buy our way out. You better make sure we get him declared legally incompetent immediately. You push your mother to drug him. You push your idiot brother to get the power of attorney. You do whatever it takes to get control of that ticket. Because if we miss this window, I swear to God I will hand the FBI all the documents proving you were the sole mastermind behind the whole crypto scheme." He was threatening to frame my little girl. He had orchestrated a massive federal crime, roped his unsuspecting wife into the legal crosshairs, and was now holding her freedom hostage to force her to steal my fortune. Jasmine was not acting out of pure greed like Aaron or Diane. She was acting out of absolute paralyzing terror. Logan had her trapped in a corner, and he was using her fear to turn her into a weapon against her own father. It made me sick to my stomach to read how easily he manipulated her tears, twisting her panic into a tool for his own survival. I sat back in my leather chair, the transcript trembling in my calloused hands. The sheer audacity of this white entitled scam artist coming into my family, looking down his nose at me for working with my hands, all while secretly planning to destroy my daughter and steal my life savings to flee the country. It was a level of pure evil that demanded absolute destruction. I had spent my entire adult life fixing broken engines and putting things back together, but right now I was going to break something beyond repair. Logan thought he was a criminal mastermind playing a game of chess with a group of uneducated fools. He thought he could manipulate my family, orchestrate my institutionalization, and ride off into the sunset with my hard-earned money. He was about to find out what happens when you corner a man who has nothing left to lose and everything to protect. I was not just going to stop Logan from stealing my money. I was going to hand-deliver him to the federal agents he was trying so desperately to escape. I needed a bait so irresistible, so utterly perfect, that his own overwhelming greed would seal his inevitable fate. I picked up my cell phone and called Mr. Hayes. I did not ask for standard legal advice this time. I asked for a highly specific, highly sensitive favor. With his extensive connections dealing with high-net-worth estates, Mr. Hayes knew discreet professionals who operated in the gray areas of the law. I wired $5,000 to a secure, untraceable account and provided the exact details of the winning lottery ticket I had already claimed. I gave them the date, the time of purchase, the exact sequence of numbers, the security barcodes, and the specific store identifier. Within 24 hours, a private courier delivered a small, vacuum-sealed envelope to a post office box across town. Inside was an absolute masterpiece. It was a flawless, museum-quality forgery of my winning state lottery ticket. The specialized paper stock was identical. The thermal printing was incredibly precise. To the naked eye, and even to a trained eye without a digital lottery scanner, it was the genuine $10 million prize. It was the golden ticket they were all ready to commit treason for. That afternoon, I walked out to the driveway where my old Ford pickup was parked. Logan often borrowed my truck to run errands when his fancy sports car was conveniently in the shop, which happened frequently because he could not actually afford the maintenance. I opened the passenger side door and knelt down on the hard concrete driveway. I slid my hand deep under the passenger seat, feeling around the dusty metal tracks and discarded fast food napkins. I wedged the forged lottery ticket perfectly between the rubber floor mat and the metal seat rail. I left just a tiny, tantalizing corner of the paper exposed just enough to catch the eye of someone frantically searching for a way out of a federal indictment. The bait was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the rat to bite. The very next morning, Logan sauntered into the kitchen, his arrogance back in full force. He casually tossed his empty coffee mug into the sink and looked at me with a strained, fake smile. His European sports car was in the shop again, a convenient excuse. He asked if he could borrow my old truck to run to the supermarket for some premium coffee beans and a few groceries. I handed him the keys without a single second of hesitation, playing the part of the compliant, forgetful old man perfectly. I watched from the window as he backed out of the driveway, the engine sputtering slightly under his heavy foot. 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated with a motion alert from the hidden dash cam I had installed in the truck months ago for insurance purposes. I watched the live feed as Logan parked outside the grocery store. He leaned over to grab his expensive leather wallet from the passenger seat, but it slipped from his grasp, tumbling to the floorboard. As he bent down to retrieve it, his hand froze in midair. There, wedged perfectly between the rubber floor mat and the metal seat rail, was the tiny exposed corner of the forged lottery ticket. Logan slowly pulled the piece of paper from the dirt and grime. I watched through this camera as his eyes widened to the size of saucers. He frantically pulled out his smartphone, his fingers trembling uncontrollably as he pulled up the state lottery website. He looked at the screen, then back at the ticket, verifying the sequence of numbers line by line. 7, 14, 22, 38, 41, Powerball 12. The sheer magnitude of his greed washed over his entire face, twisting his handsome features into something predatory and ugly. He did not immediately reach for his phone to call Diane or Aaron to share the good news. He did not let out a shout of collective family triumph. Instead, a dark, sinister grin spread across his face. He realized in that exact second that he held $10 million in the palm of his hand, and he did not have to share a single dime with his mother-in-law or his desperate brother-in-law. He quickly folded this fake ticket, shoved it deep into the inner breast pocket of his designer jacket, and slapped the steering wheel in silent, selfish victory. He completely abandoned his grocery run. He threw the truck into reverse tires, squealing against the asphalt, and sped recklessly back to the house. When Logan burst through the front door, he bypassed the kitchen, entirely ignoring Diane, who was sitting at the island drinking her tea. He sprinted straight up the stairs to the guest bedroom he shared with Jasmine. Thanks to the network of hidden cameras I had discreetly set up, I had a perfect high-definition view of their room from the screen of my tablet in my study. Logan slammed the heavy door shut and locked the deadbolt. Jasmine was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking stressed and exhausted from the crushing weight of the federal indictment hanging over her head. Logan crossed the room in 2 massive strides, his face flushed with manic energy. "We are out, Jasmine," he whispered violently, pulling the folded paper from his pocket like it was a holy relic. "We are completely out of the woods." He thrust the ticket into her hands. Jasmine gasped, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. "Is this it?" she asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Is this really the ticket?" Logan paced the room like a caged tiger, running a hand through his hair. "Yes. I found it shoved under the passenger seat in your idiot father's truck. He must have dropped it when he came home from the gas station. Listen to me very carefully right now. We are not telling your mother. We are absolutely not telling Aaron. Those greedy fools will try to tie it up in a family trust or use it to pay off Aaron's massive gambling debts. They do not care about us. We are taking this ticket to the lottery headquarters tomorrow morning, just the 2 of us. We claim the prize, we pay off the federal agents to make my charges disappear, and we vanish to the Cayman Islands with the rest of the millions. We will let them rot here while we live like royalty." Jasmine stared at the ticket, then looked up at the man who was actively blackmailing her just a day ago. The fear that had paralyzed her instantly evaporated, replaced by the same toxic, consuming greed that infected the rest of this house. She did not express a single ounce of guilt about stealing from her father or leaving her mother and brother with nothing. She let out a sharp squeal of pure joy, jumping up from the bed and throwing her arms around Logan's neck. They spun around the room, laughing and celebrating their grand deception. They were practically tasting the champagne on their private island, completely oblivious to the fact that they were holding a worthless, digitally printed piece of paper. I sat alone in my study, the cool leather of my chair offering no comfort against the absolute freezing chill in my heart. I watched my daughter jump up and down on the monitor, celebrating the fact that she was about to steal her father's life savings and run away. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring slightly as a painful, vivid memory surfaced from decades ago. I remembered when Jasmine was 17 years old. She desperately wanted a custom hand-beaded dress for her senior prom, something we absolutely could not afford on a mechanic's salary. I did not want her to feel less than the wealthy kids at her high school. I worked 3 extra weekend shifts at the garage, breaking my back under heavy transmissions in the freezing cold until my muscles screamed just to buy her that dress. I remembered the harsh smell of motor oil that I could not wash off my hands for weeks. I remembered the way her face lit up when she put the gown on, the way she hugged me tight and called me the best dad in the entire world. Now that same girl was dancing in the arms of a federal criminal, rejoicing in her plan to leave me destitute and locked in a psychiatric ward. Whatever lingering paternal hesitation I had was completely eradicated in that moment. She was no longer my little girl, she was just another parasite feeding off the host. Downstairs, a different kind of violent storm was rapidly brewing. Diane had noticed Logan's rushed, frantic return. She had seen him sprint up the stairs without the groceries he had promised to buy, a look of wild adrenaline on his face. Suspicious and constantly paranoid, she quietly slipped out the front door and walked over to my truck. She opened the passenger door to do her own desperate sweep for the missing ticket. She immediately noticed the rubber floor mat was crooked, and the thick layer of dust under the metal seat rail had been freshly wiped away by a frantic hand. She knew instantly that someone had found exactly what they were all looking for. Diane stormed back into the house, her face contorted with absolute unhinged fury. She bypassed the kitchen and marched straight to the bottom of the staircase. "Aaron!" she screamed, her voice echoing violently off the high ceilings like a siren. "Get down here right now!" Aaron stumbled out of his bedroom looking panicked and confused. "What is it? What happened?" he asked, hurrying down the wooden steps. Diane pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at his chest. "Where is it?" she demanded, her voice shrill and venomous. "I know you found it. You went out to the truck before Logan got back, did you not? You found the $10 million and you are trying to hide it from your own mother." "I did not find anything," Aaron shouted back, his face flushing with defensive rage as he pushed past her. "I have been in my room trying to figure out how to keep my kneecaps from being shattered by the mob. You are the one who has been searching his pockets while he sleeps." The sheer volume of the commotion drew Logan and Jasmine out of their room. They walked to the top of the landing, trying desperately to mask their smug, victorious expressions with fake confusion. "What is all the yelling about?" Logan asked, smoothly playing the innocent peacemaker while the forged ticket burned a hole in his pocket. Diane snapped her head up, locking eyes with her son-in-law. She saw the subtle smirk playing on his lips and the puzzle pieces connected in her treacherous mind. A massive, vicious family war erupted right in the middle of my living room. Accusations flew like daggers. Aaron accused Diane of hiding it in her secret bank accounts. Diane explicitly accused Logan of stealing it from the truck and plotting to run away. Jasmine screamed at her mother, defending her criminal husband. They cursed, they threatened each other, and they tore their family bonds apart over a fortune that none of them actually possessed. I sat quietly in my study, sipping a glass of water, watching the monitors as they destroyed each other. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had completely crushed them. I turned off the tablet screen and quietly moved from my study to the bedroom. I slipped under the heavy duvet, closed my eyes, and let my breathing slow into a deep, rhythmic pattern, playing the part of an exhausted, confused old man fast asleep. But my ears were sharply tuned to the venomous chaos echoing through the walls. The screaming match in the living room had escalated into a full-blown war of attrition. I could hear the sharp crash of a ceramic vase shattering against the hardwood floor, followed by the heavy thud of furniture being violently kicked. Aaron was bellowing at the top of his lungs, his voice hoarse and desperate, threatening to call the police on Logan for grand larceny. Logan fired back with vicious insults, taunting Aaron about his massive mob debts and his pathetic failures as a businessman. Diane's voice pierced through the din, shrill and hysterical, accusing both of them of conspiring against her to steal the $10 million she believed was rightfully hers. They were actively tearing each other limb from limb, completely blinded by a mirage of wealth. I lay in the dark, perfectly still, listening to the absolute destruction of my family. Not a single one of them checked on me. Not one wondered how I was coping with the loss of the ticket. Their greed was all-consuming. My phone vibrated softly against the nightstand, pulling me away from the muffled shouting outside my door. It was a secure, encrypted message from Detective Cole. I unlocked the screen, the harsh blue light illuminating my face in the dark bedroom. The subject line was simple but ominous: the final puzzle piece. I opened the file and began to scroll through dozens of heavily documented bank statements, wire transfers, and surveillance photos. For a moment, my mind struggled to comprehend the sheer scale of the deceit laid out before me. According to the financial traces Cole had meticulously uncovered, my wife had not just started plotting against me yesterday. The betrayal spanned half a decade. For the past 5 years, Diane had been systematically siphoning money out of my hard-earned retirement accounts. She had forged my signature on withdrawal slips, quietly draining thousands of dollars a month and funneling the cash into an obscure, untraceable offshore account under her maiden name. The records showed a staggering pattern of deceit. Every time she told me she was going to a weekend wellness retreat or visiting her sick sister a few states over, she was actually funneling my cash into a joint investment account with a stranger. She had even co-signed a luxury lease downtown entirely funded by my 40 years of manual labor. While I was waking up at dawn, putting on greasy overalls and destroying my joints to make sure we had a comfortable cushion for our old age, she was actively bleeding our future dry. But the money trail was only the beginning. I swiped to the next page of the dossier and my breath hitched in my throat. It was a series of high-resolution surveillance photographs taken outside a luxury downtown apartment complex. Diane was in the pictures wearing a sleek dress I had never seen, laughing and linking arms with a much younger man. Cole had managed to pull the security footage from the lobby of that building. I watched a short video clip of Diane and this stranger kissing passionately before walking into the private elevator. She was wearing the diamond necklace I had bought her for our 30th anniversary. She was wearing my love as a costume. I zoomed in on the younger man's face and a cold, violent shockwave crashed through my entire body. I knew that face. I had stared directly into his patronizing eyes just 24 hours ago in my own living room. It was Dr. Evans, the supposed highly respected psychiatrist that Diane had brought into my home to evaluate my cognitive function. He was not a medical professional. Cole's background check revealed his real name was Marcus, a 30-something failed real estate broker with a string of fraud accusations. The white coat he wore in my living room was nothing but a cheap prop bought online. The sheer terrifying magnitude of her evil washed over me. Diane had not just hired a corrupt doctor to push me into a psychiatric ward. She had brought her own paramour into my home, dressed him in a fake uniform, and orchestrated a malicious performance right in front of my face. She wanted to use her lover to declare me clinically insane, lock me in an asylum, completely strip my remaining assets, and live happily ever after with the man she had been funding with my blood and sweat. She had poisoned my water. She had stolen my money. And she had smiled in my face for 40 years. I put the phone down, staring blankly at the dark ceiling. 4 decades of marriage. I had remembered every anniversary, held her hand through every sickness, and built my entire existence around providing for her happiness. I had spent my entire life protecting her, shielding her from the harsh realities of the world, and this was my reward. She had looked me in the eyes every single day, eaten the food I provided, slept in the bed. I bought all while conspiring with a younger con artist to lock me in a padded room. Any lingering trace of guilt I felt about my plan evaporated into nothingness. I was not destroying my family. My family was already dead. The people currently breathing in this house were nothing but opportunistic scavengers. The ultimate betrayal had severed the final thread of my humanity when it came to them. I did not feel sadness. I did not feel a broken heart. I felt an absolute terrifying clarity. I was completely unburdened by love. The sun rose, casting a pale gray light over the quiet house. The screaming had finally died down hours ago, leaving behind a thick, toxic silence. I got out of bed, showered, and dressed in a crisp suit. Diane, Aaron, and Logan were still asleep in their respective rooms, completely exhausted from their night of vicious infighting over a forged piece of paper. I walked right out the front door, got into my truck, and drove straight to my primary bank. I sat across from the branch manager, a man who had known me for 2 decades. I handed him my identification and instructed him to immediately close every single joint account I held with Diane. I watched the teller type on her keyboard, executing the commands that would financially obliterate my treacherous wife. I withdrew every last cent, leaving the balances at absolute zero. The money was transferred directly into my secure individual holding accounts, completely out of her reach. I canceled her credit cards, revoked her signing privileges, and locked down my pension access with strict biometric security measures. Next, I drove straight to Mr. Hayes's office. The legal process was swift and unmerciful. He had the thick stack of property paperwork ready and waiting on his polished mahogany desk. I picked up his heavy fountain pen and signed the master deed transfer without a single ounce of hesitation. With 3 strokes of a pen, I completely relinquished my personal ownership of my home. The house I had lived in for 40 years, the house where Diane was currently sleeping, now officially belonged to the Iron Shield Trust. Mr. Hayes had expedited the filing with the county clerk. It could never be sold, mortgaged, or claimed in a divorce settlement. It was legally untouchable. I walked out of the law firm and looked up at the clear blue sky. The cage was fully constructed. The doors were locked, and my family did not even realize they were already trapped inside. I returned home and settled into my favorite armchair by the window, watching the quiet street. The heavy silence of the afternoon was suddenly shattered by the crunch of gravel in my driveway. A sleek, unmarked white van pulled up immediately, followed by a private ambulance with heavily tinted windows. 2 burly men in matching navy blue scrubs stepped out. They did not look like standard city paramedics, they looked like hired muscle. This was a private psychiatric transport unit, the kind you hire when you want someone to disappear quietly and without a messy public scene. I watched them walk up the front steps, their expressions completely devoid of any medical empathy. They moved with a clinical, unfeeling efficiency, carrying thick canvas straps and a heavy medical bag. My family had actually done it. They had made the call. The final betrayal was no longer just a whispered plan in the kitchen or a forged document on a desk. It was parking right in front of my lawn. I did not panic. I did not try to run out the back door. I simply picked up my porcelain teacup, took a slow, deliberate sip of my chamomile tea, and waited for the heavy knock on the front door. Diane opened the door before they even knocked. She ushered the 2 massive orderlies into the foyer, whispering to them in hushed, dramatic tones. Then she marched into the living room, flanked by Aaron and Jasmine. Logan lingered in the background, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching the spectacle with a smug sense of satisfaction. Diane held a thick stack of medical forms on a heavy clipboard. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were cold and dead. "Howard," she said, her voice dripping with that toxic manufactured sweetness. "The doctors are here. We have spoken with the specialists, and everyone agrees that you are no longer safe living in this house. Your memory loss and your erratic behavior have become completely unmanageable. We have arranged for you to stay at a beautiful, specialized care facility where you can get the 24-hour psychiatric help you desperately need." Aaron stepped forward, his bruised face twisted into an ugly scowl. "You just need to sign these admission papers, Dad. It is a voluntary commitment form. It makes the transition smoother. Just sign your name on the bottom line and these gentlemen will escort you to the clinic." I looked at the 2 orderlies standing shoulder to shoulder, blocking the hallway. Then I looked at my daughter. Jasmine refused to meet my gaze. She stared at the floorboards, clutching her designer handbag, perfectly willing to watch her father be dragged away to a padded room just to save herself from a federal indictment. I took another slow sip of my tea, feeling the warm liquid slide down my throat. I set the cup down on the saucer with a soft, precise clink. I did not raise my voice. I did not shout. I looked directly at Aaron. "And what happens if I refuse to sign your voluntary form?" Aaron stepped closer, his fists clenching at his sides. The facade of the loving, concerned son completely vanished. "If you do not sign it, we do it the hard way," he threatened, his voice dropping into a vicious growl. "We have already filed the preliminary paperwork for an involuntary psychological hold based on your aggressive delusions. These men are authorized to physically restrain you if you resist. They have chemical sedatives in that bag. You can walk out of here on your own 2 feet and keep your dignity, or they can strap you to a gurney and carry you out of your own house unconscious. The choice is entirely yours, old man, but you are not staying in this house tonight." Diane pushed the clipboard onto my lap, aggressively tapping the signature line with her manicured finger. "Just sign it, Howard. Stop making this harder than it has to be. It is for your own good. Look at the state of you. You are confused and hostile. We are just trying to protect our family." I looked down at the clipboard resting on my knees. They had orchestrated a complete malicious coup. They were actively threatening to drug me, bind me, and lock me away in a secure psychiatric facility just so they could tear my house apart looking for a piece of paper. They thought my profound calmness was defeat. They thought my silence was the confusion of a broken, senile mind fading into oblivion. They had absolutely no idea that I was simply sitting in my favorite chair waiting for them to fully commit to their own spectacular destruction. I picked up the silver pen resting on the metal clip. I held the pen in my hand, the cool metal resting against my calloused fingers. I did not immediately put ink to paper. I slowly looked up, meeting the eyes of every single person in that room. I looked at Aaron, desperate and indebted to violent criminals ready to sacrifice his father for his kneecaps. I looked at Jasmine, terrified and entirely manipulated by a federal fraud selling out her own blood to avoid prison. I looked at Diane, the woman who had shared my bed for 4 decades, while actively plotting my institutionalization to fund her younger lover. And finally, I looked at Logan, the arrogant white architect of their impending doom, standing there like he had conquered the world. "Listen to me very carefully," I said. My voice was eerily quiet, carrying a heavy weight and a dreadful finality that made the entire room completely still. "I am going to sign this paper. I am going to walk out that front door with these men. But I want you to understand one undeniable truth. Once I step through that door, there is absolutely no turning back for any of you. Everything that happens next is entirely of your own making. You have chosen this specific path, and you will walk it to the very bitter end." Diane scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes and waving her hand dismissively in the air. "Oh, stop being so incredibly melodramatic, Howard. It is just a medical facility. You will be back when your mind is right." Aaron grabbed the clipboard the second my signature was complete, his face breaking into a massive, relieved grin. He handed the papers to the orderlies. The 2 men stepped forward, flanking me on either side, holding their canvas straps ready. I stood up slowly and shrugged them off. "I do not need your hands on me," I stated firmly, adjusting my jacket. I walked out of my house with my head held high, my posture perfectly straight. I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, climbed into the back of the private ambulance, and took a seat on the stiff vinyl bench. The heavy doors slammed shut behind me, sealing me inside the dim clinical transport. But the moment those heavy doors clicked shut, the performance inside my living room abruptly shifted. I had left one of my small audio transmitters active on the living room bookshelf, streaming directly to a hidden earpiece I wore. Through the electronic static, I heard the immediate chaotic aftermath of my departure. Diane let out a loud, theatrical sigh of immense relief. Finally, she snapped, her voice echoing in the empty house. "The old fool is gone. Now we can rip this place apart from top to bottom until we find that ticket." Aaron chimed in immediately, his voice frantic with adrenaline. "I call the master bedroom. He probably hid it under the mattress or stuffed it into one of his old work boots." "Stop," a booming, authoritative voice commanded, cutting through the noise. It was Logan. The audio feed picked up the sound of his heavy leather shoes walking to the center of the living room. There was a brief, tense silence, followed by the crisp, unmistakable rustle of thick paper being unfolded. Logan had realized he could not simply run away with Jasmine without Diane and Aaron interfering and alerting the authorities before his escape. He needed them compliant and focused. "Stop arguing," Logan declared, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated triumph. "You do not need to tear the house apart looking for ghosts. I found it. I found the $10 million shoved under the seat in his truck this morning. Pack your bags and get your identification ready. Tomorrow morning we go down to the state lottery headquarters and we finally claim our prize." The ride in the back of the private transport van was silent, sterile, and entirely devoid of human empathy. The 2 orderlies stared straight ahead, treating me like a profitable piece of cargo rather than a human being. Through the heavily tinted windows, I watched the familiar, comforting streets of my neighborhood slowly fade into the distance. We drove for nearly an hour, the scenery shifting from residential blocks to the winding, isolated roads leading to the far outskirts of the county. We finally pulled up to a sprawling, high-walled compound. It looked much more like a luxury prison than a hospital, with manicured green lawns hiding heavy iron gates and security cameras positioned at every possible angle. The van came to a halt under a massive stone portico. The orderlies opened the back doors and gestured coldly for me to step out. I walked calmly into the grand reception area. It smelled of heavy floral air fresheners, trying desperately to mask the underlying clinical scent of bleach and institutional despair. A stern-looking receptionist behind a thick glass partition looked up, already pulling a fresh stack of intake forms. They guided me toward a set of heavy steel doors that led into the secure psychiatric wing. Before the orderly could even swipe his security badge to open the heavy steel doors, the main entrance of the facility burst open. The The glass doors swung wide and 3 men strode into the lobby with absolute undeniable authority. Leading the pack was Mr. Hayes, my attorney, his face a mask of cold legal fury. Right beside him was the county sheriff, fully uniformed, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. And flanking them was a man I recognized from my days serving jury duty, a highly respected district court judge known for taking zero nonsense from corrupt institutions. The imposing trio marched straight past the bewildered orderlies and directly up to the reception desk. The stern receptionist dropped her pen, her eyes darting nervously to the sheriff. "Call your facility director immediately," Mr. Hayes commanded, his voice echoing sharply off the marble floors. "Tell him he has exactly 60 seconds to get out here before the sheriff starts making arrests." The receptionist scrambled for her phone, her fingers trembling. Less than a minute later, a balding man in a tailored suit scurried into the lobby, wiping nervous sweat from his forehead. He took one look at the sheriff and the judge, and his professional facade crumbled instantly. "Gentlemen, how can I help you today?" the director asked, his voice shaking. Mr. Hayes did not waste a single second. He slammed a thick official medical dossier onto the glass counter. "That document is a comprehensive independent psychiatric evaluation of my client, Mr. Howard, conducted less than 3 weeks ago by the chief of psychiatry at the Central State Hospital. It includes extensive cognitive testing and brain scans. It certifies him as being in perfect, unassailable mental health. Yet you have just transported him here under the pretense of a fabricated involuntary hold signed by a fraudulent doctor with no actual medical license." The director looked at the paperwork, his face turning an alarming shade of pale. "We were just following the family directives," he stammered defensively. "They provided documentation of severe cognitive decline and hostile behavior." "They lied," the judge intervened, his voice booming with judicial authority. "And you failed to conduct proper medical due diligence. You are currently holding a perfectly sane, legally competent citizen against his will based on forged medical claims. In the eyes of the law, this is no longer a medical intake. This is unlawful imprisonment." The sheriff stepped forward, completely closing the distance between himself and the trembling director. "I suggest you open those doors and release this man immediately. If he is detained for one more second, I will arrest you, your staff, and your transport crew for felony kidnapping. Furthermore, I will personally see to it that the state strips the medical license from this entire facility by the end of the day." The director did not hesitate. He practically shoved his own receptionist out of the way to hit the security release button. The heavy steel doors unlocked with a loud, echoing clack. The orderlies who had escorted me instantly backed away, holding their hands up in the air, wanting absolutely no part of a federal kidnapping charge. Mr. Hayes walked over to me, extending a hand. "Are you ready to go home, Howard?" he asked smoothly. I smiled, adjusting the collar of my jacket. "I think I have seen enough of this place," I replied. I walked past the terrified facility director, feeling the immense satisfaction of watching a corrupt system buckle under the sheer weight of the truth. I stepped out of the grand entrance and back into the bright, crisp afternoon air. The heavy feeling of betrayal that had weighed on my chest for the past 48 hours was completely gone. I walked over to Mr. Hayes' sleek black sedan, feeling lighter than I had in decades. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a premium cigar, something I had bought specifically for this exact moment. I struck a match, letting the flame catch the tobacco, and took a long, slow drag. I blew a thick cloud of smoke into the air, watching it dissipate against the clear blue sky. My part of the performance was officially over. I had successfully played the confused old man, the vulnerable victim, and the helpless patient. I had given my greedy wife, my deceitful son, my terrified daughter, and my arrogant son-in-law all the rope they needed. Now they were firmly tied to the tracks, completely unaware that the freight train was already speeding directly toward them. The game was finished. All that was left was the spectacle. The very next morning, the city woke up to a beautiful, clear day, the kind of day that makes people believe in fresh starts and grand miracles. Downtown, the state lottery headquarters was already bustling with administrative activity. Pulling up to the front plaza was a sleek, rented luxury SUV. The doors opened and out stepped my entire family, looking like they were walking the red carpet at a Hollywood premiere. Diane wore a brand new tailored white pantsuit, a massive designer handbag clutched in her grip, her face radiating pure, unrestrained greed. Aaron had abandoned his bruised, desperate alleyway look for a sharp navy blue tuxedo, attempting to project the image of a successful financial mogul. Jasmine wore an expensive silk dress, hiding her federal terrors behind a pair of oversized designer sunglasses, and leading the pack was Logan. He wore a custom-tailored gray suit, his hair perfectly slicked back, walking with the arrogant, untouchable swagger of a man who believed he had just outsmarted the entire world. They marched through the grand glass doors of the lottery building, moving as a single unified front of absolute deception. They bypassed the standard customer service lines and demanded to speak directly with the claims director for major jackpots. They stood together at the polished marble counter, completely united by their shared theft, their previous vicious infighting totally forgotten in the face of immense wealth. Logan reached into his breast pocket with a smug, victorious grin. He pulled out the forged lottery ticket, the perfect, flawless counterfeit I had planted under the seat of my truck, and placed it proudly onto the cold marble surface. They were minutes away from demanding $10 million. They had absolutely no idea they were standing on a landmine, and the timer had just hit 0. Logan stepped right up to the thick, bulletproof glass partition separating them from the chief claims director. He smoothed the lapels of his custom gray suit and slid the forged lottery ticket through the small metal slot. "We are here to claim the $10 million jackpot," he announced, his voice carrying the sickening confidence of a man who believed he had just successfully robbed the bank and owned the vault. "My father-in-law purchased this ticket, but due to a sudden and severe decline in his mental faculties, we have assumed full legal and physical responsibility for his estate. We are his unified family, stepping in to manage his affairs." Diane nodded gravely, pressing a tissue to her dry eyes in a pathetic display of fake sorrow. Aaron stood tall, puffing out his chest in his rented tuxedo, while Jasmine adjusted her designer sunglasses, already imagining the tropical breeze of the Cayman Islands. The claims director, a severe woman with sharp spectacles, did not smile. She picked up the ticket carefully, her eyes narrowing slightly as she examined the paper under the harsh fluorescent lights. She turned to her computer terminal, placing the ticket face down onto the high-definition digital scanning bed. The family held their collective breath, waiting for the confetti to drop. The red laser of the scanner swept across the barcode on the back of the ticket. A sharp, dissonant beep echoed from the computer terminal. The claims director frowned, pulling the ticket from the glass bed. She flipped it over, typed a rapid sequence of commands into her keyboard, and ran it through a secondary specialized ultraviolet verification scanner. The screen blinked twice before flashing a massive, pulsating red error message. "Invalid serial. Fraudulent document detected." The director did not say a word to Logan. She calmly reached under her desk and pressed the silent security alarm. Instantly, the atmosphere in the grand lobby shifted from bureaucratic calm to absolute terrifying lockdown. The heavy glass entry doors they had just walked through automatically sealed shut with a loud magnetic clack. Thick steel security shutters descended rapidly over the windows, plunging the room into a stark artificial glow. A high-pitched siren began to wail, vibrating through the floorboards. Logan frowned, his smug facade cracking. "Excuse me, what is going on?" he demanded, tapping the glass partition. "The machine must be glitching. Scan it again. That is a $10 million ticket. Do you know how to do your job?" Before the director could even formulate a response, the double doors leading to the internal security offices burst open. A tactical squad of 6 armed state troopers wearing heavy tactical vests and carrying zip ties flooded into the lobby. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, completely surrounding my family. "State police, put your hands on the counter." "Now," the lead officer roared. Logan bristled, his white privilege flaring up instantly. He stepped back, holding his hands up defensively but refusing to comply. "Do you know who I am?" he shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. "There is a massive misunderstanding here. I am a tech executive. We are claiming a legitimate prize. Do not touch me." The lead trooper did not care about his tailored suit or his arrogant tone. He lunged forward, grabbing Logan by the shoulder and sweeping his legs out from under him. Logan hit the marble floor hard, his designer jacket tearing at the seam. He gasped for air as 2 officers pinned his arms behind his back, ratcheting heavy plastic zip ties around his wrists. Diane let out a blood-curdling shriek as an officer grabbed her arms, forcing her against the counter. Aaron tried to run, his survival instinct kicking in, but he barely made it 2 steps before a trooper tackled him into a row of velvet stanchions. The velvet ropes collapsed around him as he was forcefully restrained on the ground. Jasmine was backed against the wall, hyperventilating, crying hysterically as an officer secured her wrists. "You are all under arrest," the lead trooper announced, his voice cutting through the wailing sirens. You are being charged with the felony forgery of state documents, attempted grand larceny of state funds, and criminal conspiracy to defraud the state lottery commission. This ticket is a highly sophisticated counterfeit. The penalty for attempting to cash a forged jackpot ticket is 20 years in a federal penitentiary. You have the right to remain silent. Logan writhed on the cold marble floor, his cheek pressed against the polished stone, his eyes wide with absolute world-shattering horror. The $10 million dream had instantly transformed into a waking nightmare. The unified family front disintegrated in less than 10 seconds. As the officers hauled them to their feet, the vicious blaming began. Diane thrashed against the trooper, holding her screaming directly at Logan. "You did this! You brought us here! You told us it was real! You set us up, you arrogant piece of trash!" Logan spat back at her, his face contorted in fury. "Shut up, Diane, I found it in his truck." "That old man set us up." Aaron, struggling against his restraints, kicked wildly at Logan. "You said it was verified. You promised me we were getting the money. The mob is going to kill me, Logan. They are going to kill me because of you." Jasmine was completely inconsolable, sobbing violently, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks. "I did not do anything," she wailed to the officers. "I did not know it was fake. My husband made me come. Please, I cannot go to jail." They screamed, cursed, and spat at one another, a pathetic display of rats turning on each other the moment the ship began to sink. Their greed had finally consumed them whole. The state troopers marched the four of them in a single file line toward the heavily secured rear exit of the lottery headquarters. As the heavy metal doors swung open, the blinding midday sun hit their faces, followed instantly by the rapid-fire flashing of camera lenses. I had made sure to place an anonymous tip to the local news stations about a massive fraud bust happening at the state lottery office. Reporters and cameramen swarmed the barricades, shouting questions and capturing every humiliating second of their perp walk. Diane tried to hide her face behind her shoulder. Aaron hung his head, openly weeping. Jasmine looked like a terrified ghost. But Logan kept his head up, his jaw clenched in defiant rage, still trying to project an aura of superiority, even with his hands bound behind his back. The troopers guided them toward a row of waiting armored police vans in the private loading zone. As they walked across the hot asphalt, Logan noticed a vehicle blocking the immediate path to the transport vans. It was a massive, pristine, pitch-black Rolls-Royce Phantom. It sat there like a modern chariot, gleaming in the sunlight, radiating absolute, undeniable wealth. The engine purred with a silent, intimidating power. As the officers paused to navigate the prisoners around the luxury vehicle, the dark-tinted rear passenger window began to roll down with a smooth mechanical hum. Logan stopped dead in his tracks, his arrogant glare completely dissolved, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. I was sitting comfortably in the plush leather back seat, wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit, a premium cigar resting effortlessly between my fingers. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked down at him with the cold, dead eyes of a man who had just executed the perfect judgment. The holding room of the county detention center smelled of cheap disinfectant, cold sweat, and undeniable despair. I walked through the heavy steel doors wearing my custom-tailored charcoal suit, my posture perfectly straight, my mind sharper than a freshly honed blade. They were sitting on the opposite side of a scratched metal table, handcuffed, dressed in identical orange jumpsuits. The moment the heavy door clanked shut behind me, the room erupted. They still firmly believed they were playing a game with a confused, vulnerable old man. Howard Diane shrieked, slamming her bound hands against the table. "What are you doing just standing there? Tell the guards there was a massive misunderstanding. Pay our bail immediately." Aaron was hyperventilating, his face pale and slick with panicked sweat. "Dad, you have to get me out of here right now. The mob knows I am locked up. They are going to kill me the second I step foot in the general population. Use the house as collateral. Just get us out." Logan scoffed, shaking his head with a stubborn, arrogant sneer that he refused to drop. "You senile old fool. You completely set us up. Call your lawyer right now and fix this before I sue you for everything you own." Jasmine just sobbed uncontrollably, begging for her daddy to save her from the nightmare she had willingly walked into. I let them yell. I let them demand. I stood in absolute silence until their frantic voices faded into a pathetic, desperate murmur waiting for me to comply. I stepped forward and casually unbuttoned my suit jacket. I did not speak right away. Instead, I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out 3 thick, heavy manila folders. I dropped them onto the cold metal table. The sound cracked through the silent room like a gunshot. "I am not here to save you. I said, my voice eerily calm, completely stripped of the confused tremor they had grown so used to. I am here to watch you drown. I pointed to the first folder and slid it directly toward Aaron. Inside are the complete surveillance transcripts and video stills from the alleyway downtown, $200,000 owed to the Petrov syndicate. You stole my $22,000 emergency fund to buy yourself 24 hours. Then you eagerly offered my life, my freedom, and my mental sanity to violent criminals just to save your own pathetic skin. You wanted to sell the house I paid for, with my blood to cover your embezzlement. Aaron stared at the folder, the remaining color draining from his face as his jaw dropped open. I slid the second folder toward Logan. He tried to maintain his arrogant glare, but his eyes darted nervously to the thick stack of papers bearing federal seals. You thought you were the smartest man in the room, Logan. You thought your white-collar background made you superior. You thought looking at an older black mechanic meant looking at an easy mark. Inside that folder is the complete FBI dossier on your multi-million-dollar cryptocurrency fraud ring. I know you blackmailed my daughter. I know you tried to frame her to save yourself. And I made absolutely sure the federal agents waiting outside this very building received copies of your unencrypted hard drives. Logan physically recoiled, his smug mask instantly shattering into a million pieces. The reality of 20 years in a federal penitentiary finally hit him, leaving him gasping for air like a landed fish. I turned my freezing gaze to Diane. She was glaring at me, her chest heaving with indignant rage. I pushed the third folder directly in front of her. "Open it, Diane," I commanded. She hesitated, then flipped the cover open with her bound hands. Staring back at her were high-resolution photographs of her passionately kissing the fake psychiatrist outside his luxury downtown apartment. The diamond necklace I bought her for our 30th anniversary was glittering perfectly in the camera flash. "For 5 years, you siphoned my retirement funds to pay for your younger lover," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing absolute zero. "You brought him into my home wearing a fake white coat. You laced my drinking water with synthetic hallucinogens to artificially induce a psychotic break. You looked me in the eyes, every single day, smiled and actively plotted to lock me inside an asylum so you could spend my blood and sweat on your filthy affair. I did not raise my voice, I did not stutter, I delivered every single sentence with the lethal, unwavering precision of a mechanic dismantling a useless rusted engine. I took 40 years of their disrespect, their greed, and their manipulation, and I handed it right back to them in the form of absolute, inescapable destruction. I am not here to pay your bail, I finalized. I am here to deliver your sentence." The four of them sat completely frozen. The oppressive silence in the holding room was absolute, broken only by the harsh hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. They looked at the highly classified documents spread across the metal table, then slowly looked up at me. They saw the expensive, tailored suit I was wearing. They heard the flawless, commanding vocabulary I had just used. The realization washed over their faces like a tidal wave of pure terror. The bewildered, forgetful old man they thought they were manipulating had never actually existed. I had orchestrated every single move. I had known every dirty secret, anticipated every vile betrayal, and flawlessly guided them right into a concrete cell. I had watched them tear each other apart in my living room over a piece of paper. I had allowed them to strap me into a psychiatric transport van without a fight. I had placed the forged lottery ticket perfectly under the seat of my truck, knowing their uncontrollable greed would blind them to the obvious trap. I was the sole architect of their complete ruin. Aaron began to quietly weep, burying his face in his handcuffed hands, knowing his life was over. Jasmine shrank into her hard plastic chair, realizing her father was no longer her safety net. Logan stared blankly at the cinderblock wall, a thoroughly broken man. They finally understood that the 68-year-old mechanic they had completely underestimated was the one who had locked the cage and thrown away the key. But Diane, ever the vicious, unyielding narcissist, refused to accept total defeat. Her initial shock violently mutated into a furious, spiteful rage. She slammed her hands on the table again, the metal chain of her cuffs rattling aggressively against the steel. "You think you are so smart, Howard?" she screamed, her voice echoing wildly off the concrete walls. "You think you have won, but you are just as pathetic and broken as we are. You gave up your home, your family, and your entire life for a useless piece of paper. You set us up with a fake ticket, which means you never won anything. You are completely empty-handed. We might be going to jail, but you are going to die a poor, lonely, miserable old man with grease under your fingernails. You have absolutely nothing. You destroyed us for no reason." She laughed, a harsh, hysterical sound that reeked of desperate denial. "You played a grand game, Howard, but the $10 million was a lie. You are still just a broke mechanic." Right at that exact moment, the heavy steel door behind me clicked and swung open. The sharp, authoritative clack of expensive leather shoes echoed into the small room. Mr. Hayes, my attorney, stepped into the cold holding cell. He was wearing an immaculate navy blue suit, carrying a sleek leather portfolio under his arm. He stood right beside me, looking down at the four prisoners with a calm, professional smirk that radiated absolute, untouchable power. He smoothly adjusted his tie, his sharp gaze locking directly onto Diane's furious, tear-stained face. "Excuse me, Diane," Mr. Hayes said, his voice crisp and smooth, slicing right through her hysterical, mocking laughter. "Who exactly told you that the $10 million was fake?" Mr. Hayes smoothly opened his sleek leather portfolio and extracted a single crisp sheet of paper. He slid it across the scratched metal table right over the photos of Diane and her fake doctor. "The ticket your son-in-law so arrogantly slammed onto the lottery counter today was indeed a flawless counterfeit," Mr. Hayes stated. His voice rang with absolute authority, echoing off the cinderblock walls. However, the jackpot itself was very real. "My client, Mr. Howard, claimed the actual verified winning ticket over a month ago. The authentic $10 million was completely processed, heavily taxed, and securely transferred before any of you even realized it was missing." Diane stared at the document, her eyes wide, as she read the official state lottery seals. "That money," Mr. Hayes continued, "has been sitting safely inside the Iron Shield Trust. It is a highly secure, irrevocable financial entity created solely for this exact purpose. The state recognizes the trust as the sole winner. Mr. Howard holds no personal claim to the jackpot. You spent the last month destroying your lives fighting over a shadow while the actual fortune was already locked inside an impenetrable vault." Diane scoffed, though her voice shook with a sudden creeping terror. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white against the steel. "It does not matter what fancy name you call it," she snapped, glaring at me with raw desperation. "We have been married for 40 years, Howard. That money was acquired during our marriage. Half of that trust is legally mine by right. I will file for divorce the second I get my phone call, and my lawyers will rip your little shield to shreds. I will take half of those millions and I will use it to crush you." Mr. Hayes let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "You clearly do not understand how an irrevocable trust operates, Diane," he said, leaning over the table and looking directly into her frantic eyes. "When Mr. Howard transferred that winning ticket into the Iron Shield Trust, he legally relinquished all personal ownership of the asset. The money does not belong to him as an individual. It belongs exclusively to the trust. Therefore, it is not considered marital property under any state law. It is not an asset that can be divided in a divorce settlement. A family court judge cannot touch it. A high-priced divorce lawyer cannot subpoena it. You cannot lay a single finger on a dime of that fortune." Diane's face turned a sickening shade of gray. The fierce defiance in her eyes flickered and completely died out. It was replaced by the crushing realization of her absolute powerlessness. Furthermore, Mr. Hayes continued, his tone clinical and completely unmerciful. "Because the funds are strictly shielded, you cannot petition the court to release any of it for your legal defense. And you are all going to need a phenomenal defense. You are facing state felony charges for defrauding the Lottery Commission. Logan is facing federal wire fraud and racketeering charges. Aaron is looking at grand larceny. The legal retainers alone will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money that none of you have." Logan pulled violently at his handcuffs, his breathing heavy and erratic. "I have my own accounts," he snarled defensively. "I have my corporate assets and offshore holdings. Your corporate assets were frozen by the FBI at 6 o'clock this morning," Mr. Hayes corrected smoothly without missing a beat. "Your bank accounts, your investment portfolios, and your fraudulent crypto wallets have been seized under federal racketeering laws. You have zero liquid capital anywhere in the world." "But the house," Jasmine whimpered. She looked desperately at her mother, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, we can use the house for collateral. We can post bail with the property and figure this out from the outside." I stepped forward, looking down at my daughter with eyes as cold as stone. "You cannot use the house, Jasmine," I said, my voice flat and unyielding. "Because I transferred the deed to the trust weeks ago. None of you own a single brick, a single shingle, or a single blade of grass on that property. You have absolutely nothing to leverage. No assets, no secret funds, no bail money. You will sit in these county cells until your trial dates, and then you will be transferred to state and federal prisons. You are entirely bankrupt, both morally and financially." A loud guttural sob ripped through the silent holding room. Aaron dropped his head onto the metal table, the sound of his skull hitting the steel echoing sharply. His entire body shook with violent, uncontrollable tremors. "They are going to kill me," he wept, his voice muffled against the cold table. "You do not understand, Dad. The Petrov Syndicate does not care if I am in a county jail. They have people inside. They have guards on their payroll. If I do not pay them their $200,000 by Tuesday, they will have me stabbed in the showers before I even make it to my preliminary hearing." He looked up at me, his face slick with tears and snot, an absolutely pathetic sight. "Dad, please. They will murder me. You know they will." I looked at the son I had worked double shifts to put through college. "You made your deal with the devil, Aaron," I replied coldly, showing no mercy. "Now you have to collect your wages. I will not spend a single penny of my trust to buy your life back from the men you tried to sell me to." A heavy knock sounded on the steel door. A county corrections officer stepped into the room holding a plastic evidence bag containing Diane's personal belongings. "Excuse me," the officer said, looking directly at Diane. "You requested to use your personal credit card to process a premium phone call to a bail bondsman. The transaction was declined. We ran your secondary debit cards as well, just like you asked. Every single account came back with a zero balance or was flagged by the bank as permanently closed." Diane's head snapped up. She stared at the corrections officer in pure disbelief, then turned her horrified gaze slowly back to me. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath, trembling with raw panic. "I did exactly what I promised," I said, buttoning my suit jacket with deliberate, calm precision. "Yesterday morning I walked into the bank and completely liquidated every joint account we shared. I withdrew every cent of my pension, every dollar of my savings, and every dime of the emergency fund. I canceled your credit cards. I revoked your signing privileges. You cannot buy a phone call. You cannot buy a cup of coffee. You cannot even afford the bus fare out of here if they miraculously let you go." The complete and utter finality of my words crashed over them like a falling concrete wall. The four people who had spent the last month plotting to steal my fortune, drug my water, and lock me in an asylum were now staring at their own absolute ruin. They had walked into the lottery headquarters believing they were multimillionaires, untouchable, and supreme. Now, sitting in their bright orange jumpsuits, they finally understood the brutal truth. I had taken everything. They were officially, completely, and permanently destitute. The suffocating reality of his total financial ruin finally snapped the last thread of Logan's polished Silicon Valley facade. His handsome, arrogant features twisted into a grotesque mask of pure, unfiltered hatred. He violently shoved his handcuffed hands against the metal table, the chains rattling sharply, and turned his venomous glare entirely onto Jasmine. "You stupid, worthless piece of trash," he spat, his voice echoing off the concrete walls with vicious cruelty. "I should have never married into this pathetic family. I gave you a life of luxury. I pulled you out of your mediocre existence, and this is what I get in return. Your ignorant grease monkey father sets me up, and you just sit there crying like a useless fool." He did not stop there. The refined progressive tech executive completely vanished, replaced by the ugly racist bigot he had always hidden beneath his expensive suits. He hurled vile, unforgivable slurs at my daughter, insulting her intelligence, her background, and the very color of her skin. He blamed his entire federal downfall on the incompetence of what he called a family of low-class street hustlers who did not know their proper place in the world. He stood there in his orange jumpsuit, screaming that he was far too smart, too important, and too white to go down for a crime because of a family like ours. He made sure she knew exactly how repulsive he found her now that the money was gone. Jasmine shrank back against her hard plastic chair as if she had been physically struck by his words. The shock on her face was absolute and devastating. For years, she had contorted herself to fit into Logan's elite world, alienating her own family, turning her back on her roots, and blindly signing fraudulent corporate documents just to keep the affection of a man who secretly despised her. Now the illusion was brutally shattered. She saw him not as the wealthy savior she thought she married, but as a venomous, manipulative racist who was perfectly willing to throw her under the federal bus the second his privilege was threatened. She let out a gut-wrenching sob, sliding off her chair and dropping heavily to her knees on the cold, filthy floor of the holding cell. She crawled toward me, her handcuffs clinking against the concrete, her face smeared with ruined makeup and tears of profound regret. "Dad!" she wailed, her voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated desperation. "Dad, please. I am so sorry. I did not know he felt this way. I did not know he hated us. I did not know he was using me to hide his stolen money. You have to help me. Please, Dad, I am your little girl. Do not let them put me in a federal prison. I will do anything you ask. Just get me a lawyer. Protect me from him. Please save me." She reached out with her bound hands, trying to grasp the fabric of my tailored trousers. I took a slow, deliberate step back, moving entirely out of her reach. I looked down at the daughter I had raised, the girl I had worked 3 jobs for, just to buy a simple prom dress, the child I had protected from every hardship in life. And I felt absolutely nothing. The well of my paternal grace had run completely dry, scorched away by the horrific betrayals of the past month. I looked her dead in the eye, my gaze as cold and unforgiving as a glacial winter. "You are not a victim here, Jasmine," I said, my voice sharp and steady, slicing right through her hysterical sobbing. "You stood in the hallway of my home and actively plotted to lock me inside a psychiatric ward. You knew exactly what your husband was planning to do to me, and you cheered for him when he held up that forged lottery ticket in your bedroom. You danced and celebrated the fact that you were going to leave your father to rot in an asylum. You sold out your own blood, the man who broke his back to give you a decent life, all to protect a criminal who looks down on our skin color and treats our heritage like garbage. You chose the illusion of his wealth over your own family. You chose his validation over my safety. You made your bed with a racist con artist, Jasmine, and now you have to lie in it. You chose this exact ending. You will face the federal judge, you will take responsibility for the shell companies you signed your name to, and you will learn your lesson inside a prison cell." Jasmine stared up at me, her mouth open in a silent scream of disbelief. She had always relied on my soft heart, assuming that no matter how horribly she treated me, my unconditional love would eventually force me to rescue her from her own terrible decisions. But that father was dead. They had killed him the moment they started slipping hallucinogens into his drinking water and gleefully preparing his asylum admission papers. I did not offer her a single word of comfort. I did not reach down to help her up from the filthy floor. I simply adjusted my cuffs and stared at her with the detached clinical observation of a judge delivering a life sentence. The emotional manipulation that had governed our family dynamics for decades was permanently severed. I finally understood that sharing DNA does not obligate you to endure malicious abuse. Breaking free from the toxic expectation of endless forgiveness was the most liberating feeling I had ever experienced. I was perfectly content to watch her face the full, unmitigated wrath of the United States justice system. She had dug her own grave, and I was merely refusing to hand her a ladder. As Jasmine's agonized sobs echoed through the small concrete room, the heavy steel door swung open once again. This time it was not a county corrections officer or a local sheriff. 2 men in crisp dark suits and solid blue ties stepped into the holding cell. Their badges gleamed brightly under the harsh fluorescent lights bearing the unmistakable, terrifying seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They moved with a silent, imposing authority, completely ignoring Diane's stunned gasps and Aaron's pathetic continued whimpering in the corner. The lead agent walked straight past the metal table and stopped directly in front of Logan. Logan tried to stand tall, attempting to muster one last ounce of his shattered arrogance, but his knees visibly trembled under the intense federal scrutiny. "Logan Mitchell," the agent announced, his voice echoing like a final gavel strike. "You are being immediately transferred into federal custody. You are formally charged with 14 counts of wire fraud, interstate racketeering, and money laundering. The federal prosecutor has successfully secured a grand jury indictment this morning based directly on the unencrypted hard drives seized from your residence. Your bail has been categorically denied due to an extreme flight risk." Logan opened his mouth to argue, to demand his high-priced attorneys to assert his fading privilege, but the second agent grabbed him firmly by the shoulder and forcefully hauled him toward the door. Logan stumbled, his bright orange jumpsuit bagging around his frame, his racist bravado completely silenced by the crushing, inescapable weight of the federal government. He looked back over his shoulder, locking eyes with me one last time, a look of pure, defeated terror on his face. I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. The federal agents dragged my son-in-law out of the room, the heavy steel door slamming shut behind him with a resonant metallic boom that signaled the absolute end of his fraudulent life. As the echo of the heavy steel door faded, the county corrections officers stepped into the room to clear the remaining prisoners. They grabbed Aaron by his shoulders, hauling him to his feet. My son dragged his feet across the linoleum, weeping openly, his spirit completely crushed by the looming threat of the syndicate. Jasmine was pulled up next, her eyes wide and vacant, staring blankly at the concrete floor as the reality of her federal indictment finally broke her mind. The guards escorted them both out of the holding cell without a single word of protest. The heavy door clanked shut once more, the metallic sound ringing with absolute finality. The chaotic, crowded room was suddenly empty. The suffocating tension evaporated, leaving behind a cold, sterile silence. It was just Diane and me sitting across from each other at the scratched metal table. The woman I had promised to love and protect for 4 decades was now shivering in a bright orange jumpsuit, her designer makeup smeared her perfect hair a tangled mess. She stared at me, the arrogant defiance she had wielded like a weapon finally slipping from her grasp. She was alone. The children she had manipulated were gone. The son-in-law she had conspired with was in federal custody. It was just the two of us facing the absolute wreckage of the life she had systematically destroyed. Mr. Hayes stepped forward, opening his leather portfolio one last time. He extracted a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue clip. He placed it gently on the table and slid it directly across the metal surface until it rested perfectly in front of Diane's trembling hands. The bold black letters on the cover page were impossible to misinterpret. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I looked her directly in the eye, my expression devoid of any warmth or hesitation. Sign them, I commanded softly. Diane stared at the divorce papers as if they were venomous snakes. You cannot just throw me away. Howard, she stammered, her voice shaking with a desperate, pathetic edge. We built a life together. You cannot just leave me with nothing. You left yourself with nothing, Diane, I replied, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the table. You thought you were so incredibly clever. You thought your little secret life was perfectly hidden. But when I hired Detective Cole to look into your fake psychiatrist, he did not just find photographs of your romantic hotel dates. He dug into the municipal property records. He found the financial trail you worked so hard to bury. Diane swallowed hard, the remaining color draining from her cheeks. I know about the reverse mortgage, Diane, I said, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. I know that 3 years ago you forged my signature on a massive stack of bank documents. You took out a predatory reverse mortgage on our family home, extracting hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity. The equity I built by breaking my back under heavy machinery for 40 years. You drained the value of our house and funneled every single penny directly into Marcus's bank accounts. You bought him that luxury downtown condo. You leased that expensive sports car he drives. You funded a lavish, wealthy lifestyle for a con artist using the very roof over my head. Diane opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was completely paralyzed by the exposure of her ultimate betrayal. You thought you could just lock me in a psychiatric ward. Let the bank slowly eat the house and run away with my lottery winnings to cover your tracks. I continued methodically dismantling her entire reality. But you made a fatal miscalculation. When I transferred the deed of the house into the Iron Shield Trust, it triggered an automatic title review at the bank. Their fraud department immediately flagged the forged signatures on your reverse mortgage. Mr. Hayes provided them with the undeniable proof of your forgery and the money trail leading directly to your lover. The bank has officially recalled the loan. Since the original documents were entirely fraudulent, the debt falls completely and solely on you as an individual. You owe the bank over $400,000 payable immediately. Diane began to shake violently, the metal chains of her handcuffs rattling against the table. Because you cannot pay it. The bank is foreclosing on every single asset connected to your name, I stated, delivering the final, crushing blow. They are seizing your secret offshore accounts. The authorities have already arrested Marcus for his involvement in the fraud, and they are repossessing the condo and the car. You have absolutely nothing left. You will walk out of this prison if you ever do as a convicted felon with hundreds of thousands of dollars in bank debt. You are completely, permanently ruined. The sheer, terrifying magnitude of her destruction finally shattered Diane's mind. The cold, calculating woman who had poisoned my water and smiled in my face completely vanished. She lunged forward, pressing her chest against the metal table. tears pouring down her face in ugly, desperate streams. "Howard, please," she wailed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. "You cannot do this to me. I am your wife. We have been married for 40 years. 40 years, Howard. Remember the early days? Remember when we had nothing, and we built this family together? I was foolish. I was lonely. Marcus manipulated me. He used my insecurities against me. It meant nothing, Howard. I still love you. I have always loved you." She reached out with her bound hands, desperately trying to grab my sleeve, her fingers clawing at the empty air. "Please, Howard, have mercy. Do not leave me with nothing. Call the lawyers off. Give me a small allowance from the trust. I will live in a tiny apartment. I will never bother you again. Just do not throw me into the streets. I am an old woman. I will not survive this. Please remember our vows." I sat perfectly still, listening to the agonizing, pathetic cries of the woman I had once loved more than life itself. I searched my heart for even a single drop of pity, a shred of the unconditional love that had defined my entire existence for 4 decades. I found absolutely nothing. The well was completely dry. The woman begging in front of me was a stranger, a malicious parasite who had happily plotted my total destruction just a few days ago. I placed my hands on the metal table and pushed myself up slowly. I stood to my full height, towering over her trembling, defeated frame. I reached down and calmly buttoned my suit jacket with deliberate, unhurried precision. "The woman I took vows with died a very long time ago, Diane," I said, my voice empty of any anger, devoid of any sorrow, radiating only a cold, absolute finality. "The person sitting in that chair is just a criminal facing the consequences of her own horrific actions. Enjoy your new life." I turned my back to her and walked toward the exit. I did not hesitate. I did not look back. Behind me, Diane let out a blood-curdling scream of pure, unadulterated despair. She threw her body against the reinforced glass window of the holding cell as I stepped out into the hallway. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind me, instantly muffling her hysterical wails. Her fists pounded frantically against the thick glass, her face contorted in a silent, agonizing scream as she watched me walk away. I strode down the sterile, brightly lit corridor of the detention center, my footsteps echoing with the steady, victorious rhythm of a man who had finally reclaimed his absolute freedom. 1 month later, the heavy oak doors of the state courthouse swung open, revealing the grand, imposing theater of justice. The courtroom was packed with local reporters, curious onlookers, and legal aides eager to witness the climax of the spectacular lottery fraud case. I sat perfectly still in the second row of the gallery, wearing a tailored navy suit that fit me perfectly. I rested my hands on my cane, feeling the solid wood grounding me in reality. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady drone, a stark contrast to the stifling tension radiating from the defense tables. I watched as the bailiffs led them into the room. Diane, Aaron, Jasmine, and Logan marched in single file, their wrists chained to their waists, their ankles shackled. The bright, blinding orange of their county-issued jumpsuits stripped away every single ounce of the elite, sophisticated personas they had spent their entire lives cultivating. They were no longer the wealthy tech entrepreneur, the successful investment banker, the stylish socialite, and the devoted matriarch. They were just 4 desperate, broken inmates shuffling toward the judge. I sat back and watched as they took their seats, refusing to make eye contact with each other. The ultimate stage was set. The trial was not a defense against the state. It was a vicious, unmitigated slaughter among family members. The moment the defense proceedings began, the absolute lack of loyalty they possessed was put on full, horrific display. They took the witness stand one by one, eagerly throwing each other under the judicial bus in desperate attempts to secure plea deals and reduced sentences. Logan was the first to testify. He sat in the wooden box, his arrogance replaced by a frantic, sweating desperation. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Diane and Aaron, claiming he was entirely innocent of the state forgery charges. He swore under oath that Diane was the true mastermind, stating that she had manipulated him into taking the fake ticket to the lottery office while hiding the truth about my mental state. He told the jury that Jasmine had orchestrated the entire financial cover-up, painting his own wife as a ruthless fraudster to distract from his federal racketeering indictments. Jasmine took the stand next, completely shattered. Her designer sunglasses were gone, revealing deep, dark circles under her bloodshot eyes. She wept uncontrollably into the microphone, loudly denouncing Logan as an abusive, manipulative monster. She testified that Logan had explicitly blackmailed her with federal prison time, forcing her to participate in the plot to drug me and steal the money. She turned her venom toward her mother, loudly detailing how Diane had gleefully planned my institutionalization and secretly funded her young lover using the family home. Jasmine completely burned every bridge she had left, hoping her tears would buy her a lighter sentence. Aaron was a pathetic sight. He slouched in the witness chair, his voice shaking with the constant lingering terror of the mob debts he could no longer pay. He loudly confessed to the extortion but aggressively shifted the blame onto Logan and Diane. He testified that his mother was the one who initially suggested poisoning my water to expedite my cognitive decline. He claimed Logan had promised him enough money to pay off the syndicate if he secured the power of attorney. Aaron cried out to the judge that he was just a desperate victim of a toxic family dynamic. Finally, Diane was sworn in, the woman who had spent 4 decades demanding respect and projecting moral superiority completely unraveled on the public record. She wailed and sobbed, spinning a wildly fabricated story about being deeply afraid of me. She claimed she was emotionally vulnerable, heavily manipulated by Marcus, and bullied by Logan into participating in the lottery fraud. She outright denied drugging my water, even as the prosecution played the audio recordings of her own voice plotting my demise. She tried to look at me in the gallery, offering a pathetic, pleading gaze, hoping I would somehow stand up and stop the proceedings. I sat in the gallery, my face a mask of absolute calm, watching the tragedy they had manufactured for themselves. They were actively destroying whatever shreds of dignity they had left in front of the entire city. Every vicious accusation, every theatrical tear, and every explicit betrayal they hurled at one another only solidified their collective guilt. The prosecution did not even need to push hard. They simply stepped back and allowed the defendants to incriminate each other. It was a poetic, perfectly executed justice that no amount of money could ever buy. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all charges. The judge, a stern man with no patience for familial treachery, ordered the defendants to stand for sentencing. The courtroom fell completely silent. Logan was sentenced first. Due to the state felony charges running consecutively with his federal convictions for wire fraud and racketeering, he was handed a firm 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Logan collapsed back into his chair, utterly defeated. Aaron was next. For grand larceny, attempted fraud, and conspiracy, the judge sentenced him to 5 years in state prison, a sentence that would undoubtedly be a daily nightmare given his outstanding syndicate debts. Finally, the judge looked down at Diane and Jasmine. For their direct roles in the lottery fraud, elder abuse conspiracy, and the manufacturing of false medical directives, they were both sentenced to 3 years in a state correctional facility. Jasmine wailed loudly, burying her face in her handcuffed hands. Diane stared straight ahead, completely catatonic, her 40 years of comfortable privilege officially terminating in a stark concrete cell. The gavel slammed down, sealing their fates permanently. They were ushered out of the room in a single shuffling line of defeated orange. I stood up slowly from the wooden gallery bench as the bailiffs began roughly hauling the prisoners away. I did not wait to watch them disappear through the holding doors. I had seen exactly what I came to see. I smoothed the lapels of my suit jacket, grasped the handle of my cane, and walked out of the courtroom with quiet, dignified steps. I pushed open the heavy brass doors of the courthouse lobby and stepped out onto the wide stone steps. The bright, warm midday sun instantly washed over my face, blinding me for a fraction of a second before my eyes adjusted to the brilliant light. A cool, refreshing autumn breeze swept through the city plaza, carrying the scent of roasted coffee and turning leaves. I took a deep, unrestricted breath, filling my lungs with the crisp, clean air. For the first time in over 40 years, I felt an absolute, profound sense of weightlessness. The heavy, suffocating tumor that had been growing inside my home, feeding off my hard work and plotting my destruction, had been surgically and completely removed. The toxicity, the subtle racism, the ungrateful entitlement, and the malicious greed were permanently locked away behind reinforced steel doors. I walked down the courthouse steps, feeling the solid concrete beneath my polished shoes. I had walked into this nightmare as a retired, disrespected mechanic whom everyone thought they could manipulate and discard. I was walking out as a profoundly wealthy, completely liberated man who had single-handedly dismantled a criminal conspiracy with nothing but patience, intellect, and the brutal power of the truth. I approached the curb where my private driver was waiting next to the idling black Phantom. The real chapter of my life was just beginning. 6 months have passed since the heavy oak doors of the courthouse closed on my former life. I am no longer waking up to the smell of exhaust fumes or the toxic silence of a home filled with resentful strangers. Today I woke up to the sound of waves crashing against the rocky shoreline of my private coastal estate. The ocean breeze sweeps through the open floor-to-ceiling windows, carrying a fresh, salty scent that completely clears the mind. I am sitting on a massive wrap-around mahogany balcony, holding a cup of premium black coffee, watching the sun rise over the Atlantic. There are no neighbors prying into my business. There are no greedy relatives slipping hallucinogens into my drinks or plotting my demise in the hallway. I bought this magnificent property outright using a fraction of the funds securely protected within the Iron Shield Trust. The estate is secluded, heavily guarded, and entirely mine. The peace I feel in this massive empty house is profound. It is the deep, undisturbed quiet of a man who has finally excised a malignant tumor from his life. I sip my coffee, feeling the warm morning sun on my face, completely unburdened by the heavy chains of a false family. But a man who has worked with his hands for 40 years cannot simply sit on a balcony and watch the ocean forever. I needed a purpose. I needed to build something that actually mattered, something that could not be stolen by greedy relatives or corrupted by arrogant con artists. I directed Mr. Hayes and the board of the trust to allocate a highly significant portion of my capital toward a brand new venture. I did not invest in cryptocurrency or predatory real estate schemes. I invested in sweat equity and hard work. Over the past 5 months, I have successfully opened a chain of 5 state-of-the-art automotive repair and restoration workshops scattered across the working-class districts of the city. But these are not just ordinary mechanic garages. They are fully funded training academies specifically designed for underprivileged African-American youth. I remember exactly what it was like to be a young black man with nothing but a strong back and a desperate desire to build a decent life. I remember the closed doors, the severe lack of resources, and the overwhelming pressure to just survive in a system designed to keep you at the bottom. Now I have the power to kick those doors wide open for the next generation. My academies offer fully paid apprenticeships. We bring in young men who are dangerously close to falling into the same traps of debt and street life that completely destroyed my son Aaron. We put a wrench in their hands. We teach them the complex intricacies of modern engine diagnostics, hybrid battery systems, and classic automotive restoration. We pay them a thriving living wage while they learn their trade. Furthermore, the trust provides full scholarships for our top apprentices to attend advanced engineering and business management programs at the local technical college. We are teaching them how to own the garage, not just work on the floor. I even brought Mr. Hayes and his legal team on board to teach mandatory financial literacy seminars every Friday afternoon. These young men are learning how to read complex contracts, how to manage a personal budget, and how to completely avoid the predatory loans and fraudulent investments that ruin so many lives. We are teaching them to protect themselves against the arrogant, suited criminals of the world. They will never be manipulated by smooth-talking men promising easy money. Every time I hand one of these boys his certification, I know I am changing a family tree permanently. I visit the flagship workshop every single Tuesday and Thursday. I walk the floor smelling the familiar, comforting aroma of motor oil and hot metal. I stand beside these young men, showing them the precise way to rebuild a transmission block. I see the fierce determination in their eyes, the profound pride they feel when an engine roars to life under their own hands. They respect me not because of my massive bank account, but because of my knowledge and my willingness to share it. Logan and Aaron look down on my profession, treating my life's work as a menial joke. But my life's work is currently pulling dozens of young men off the dangerous streets and giving them a permanent, respectable foundation. This is my actual legacy. I am not leaving behind a trust fund for entitled, spoiled children to fight over in family court. I am leaving behind a massive fleet of highly skilled, independent young men who will never have to beg a corrupt system for a handout. Later that evening, I returned to my coastal villa as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of violet and deep orange. The ocean air grew cold, so I lit the grand stone fireplace in the center of my vast living room. As I was organizing a small box of personal items I had brought from my old house, my fingers brushed against a smooth wooden frame. I pulled it out and stared at it in the flickering firelight. It was a family portrait taken nearly a decade ago. Diane was smiling, her arm wrapped tightly around my waist. Aaron stood tall in his expensive college blazer. Jasmine was laughing next to him. We looked like the absolute picture of the perfect American dream. But looking at it now, I felt absolutely nothing. It was just a highly produced piece of glossy paper depicting four strangers who never actually existed. The smiles were purely transactional. The hugs were calculated positioning. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel a solitary pang of regret. I tossed the wooden frame directly into the roaring flames. The glass cracked instantly under the intense heat. The glossy paper curled, blackened, and quickly dissolved into gray ash rising up the dark chimney. The past was permanently closed. I walk over to the massive glass doors and look out over the dark ocean, listening to the powerful, steady rhythm of the waves crashing against my private shore. I am 68 years old and my life is truly just beginning. People always say that suddenly coming into a massive amount of money will completely change who you are. They warn you that wealth corrupts the soul and twists the mind. But after everything I have survived, I know that is a complete lie. Money does not change people at all. Money simply acts as a powerful magnifying glass. It removes the polite masks people wear when they need something from you. It strips away the fake smiles, the calculated hugs, and the manufactured loyalty. $10 million did not turn my wife into a treacherous thief. She was already stealing from me. $10 million did not turn my son into a desperate criminal willing to sell my sanity to the mob. He was already a fraud. The money just gave them the ultimate incentive to stop hiding their true nature. They thought my fortune was going to be their ultimate salvation. They thought they could easily manipulate an old, uneducated mechanic and ride off into a luxurious sunset. Instead, that winning ticket became the very trap that exposed their darkest evils and secured their total ruin. I used their own uncontrollable greed to lock them inside concrete cells. And when all those ugly, rotting masks finally fell to the floor, I took my hard-earned money and I bought the most expensive, beautiful thing in the entire world. I bought a man's absolute, unquestionable freedom. Looking back on the entire ordeal, another crucial lesson emerged from the wreckage. I learned that true power often lies in silence and observation. For decades, I was the hardworking provider thinking that endless sacrifice would earn me respect and loyalty. But the moment I stopped reacting and started quietly watching, I gained the ultimate upper hand. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to toxic people is to simply let them think they are outsmarting you. Protecting your peace, your sanity, and your assets is never a selfish act, but a necessary boundary against those who view your kindness as a weakness to be endlessly exploited. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate justice and reclaiming your life, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own thoughts in the comments below.